The Galactic Republic was the Star Wars galaxy's dominant power for over 25,000 years, an unimaginably long stretch of time in which the Republic evolved from a small confederation based on trade to a galaxy-spanning behemoth. It did all of this primarily through trade and diplomacy, and though the Republic had imperialist tendencies, it was still unique among the galaxy's great powers for its relative non-violence. But even though the Republic might have preferred trade and cooperation to conquest, most of its adversaries didn't, and this forced the Republic to arm itself at various points in galactic history. The Republic's military forces fought in countless wars over the millennia, and in their time, they were the most powerful armed force in the galaxy. The Republic military left a massive mark on history, and its legacy outlasted the Republic itself, since many of its traditions and doctrines were adopted by the Imperial military. But the story of how the Republic military came to be, and how it became the fighting force we're familiar with, is surprisingly complicated and much darker than you would probably expect. Today, we'll be telling the story of the Republic military's origins and early evolution.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
If you've watched our series on the history of the Republic, you might remember that the Galactic Republic formed 25,053 years before the Battle of Yavin. Following the end of the Unification Wars, dignitaries from major systems across the core worlds met on Coruscant, where they drafted and signed the Galactic Constitution, bringing the Republic into being. But in these ancient times, the Republic was vastly different from the galaxy-spanning government Star Wars fans know and love. When it was founded, the Republic was less of a centralized government and more of a loose confederation that governed trade and prevented internal conflict between Republic members. The Republic's territory was mostly limited to the Arrowhead, the inner region of the core worlds, and most of its member civilizations acted more or less as independent states. The early Republic did have a bare-bones central government led by the Galactic Senate, but it lacked most of the other centralized institutions it would later become known for. In particular, the early Republic lacked a standing military. This was because the Republic's founders didn't think it was necessary. Most of the Republic's founding members had their own defense forces, after all, and the Senate believed that was enough, since the Republic didn't have any powerful enemies on its borders. After the Jedi Order allied with the Republic in 25,000 BBY and became the fledgling government's protectors, the Republic became even more assured of its security, to the point that even the Republic scouts and traders who braved the depths of the Rim traveled in lightly armed vessels. But this state of affairs didn't last. Over the course of the Republic's first 1,000 years, its scouts discovered two great hyperspace routes that stretched far out into the Rim: the Polemian Trade Route and the Corellian Run. As Republic scouts branched out from these routes to explore the depths of space, they began to encroach on the territory of two other powerful civilizations. The first were the satrapies of the Tyon Cluster, a fractured collection of pirate kingdoms founded by long-lost human colonists. The second was the Hutt Empire, which in those days was an expansionist military power that stripped wealth and slaves from every planet it encountered. Both of these civilizations envied the wealth and technology of the Republic, which they longed to take for their own. The Senate remained oblivious to this, even after it made contact with the Tynese in 24,500 BBY. The Jedi repeatedly told the Republic that it was in danger, but their warnings fell on deaf ears. The Jedi did what they could to prevent the inevitable, foiling Hutt's schemes targeting the Republic and establishing a cordon of fortress worlds around the Tyon Cluster. Jedi stationed on Hashimut and Thalang Minor monitored the Tynese and did their best to pacify them, but before long, their reports back to the Jedi homeworld of Ossus confirmed that war was on the horizon. The most powerful of the Tynese satrapies, the Honorable Union of Decivero and Tyon, had gathered the other Tynese powers into a coalition, and they had begun to amass an enormous invasion fleet equipped with reverse-engineered Republic technology. In 24,000 BBY, The Taiwanese unleashed this fleet against the Republic, and the Taiwanese War, the Republic's first real war, began. Using the Polemian trade route as an invasion corridor, Taiwanese fleets raced toward the core. They advanced from the outer rim to the inner rim, capturing Republic shipyards at Abheen and trading outposts at Roche, Lance Hills, and Tiran, gaining new ships with every conquest. The Senate now realized that it had a serious problem, and in response, it voted to pool Republic members' defense forces into a centralized military. The Republic military was born, and new warships for the Republic Navy were quickly rushed into production in the shipyards of Forost, Axum, and Polemia, but by that point, it was already too late. While the Republic was still busy gathering its new military, the Taiwanese attacked the core worlds, unleashing pressure bombs upon military and civilian targets alike. Taiwanese fleets destroyed the shipyards at Polemia and Axum, and then they carried out ferocious pressure bombings of Alsakan and Coruscant itself. The casualties were terrible, but fortunately, the fledgling Republic Navy got its act together in time to prevent the Taiwanese from spreading any farther. A ragtag fleet of ships from all over the core drove the invaders from Coruscant, and shortly thereafter, the first of the Republic Navy's new ships were deployed from Forost. These were soon joined by fleets of reinforcements built at Rendili, Homberine, and Karelia, which drove the Taiwanese from the core altogether, shifting the war back to the Polemian trade route. For the first time, but certainly not the last, the Republic fortified its core territories. The Republic Navy took Forost, the Republic's largest remaining military shipyard, as its headquarters, while Anaxis became a major forward operating base, a stronghold on the Polemian that protected the inner core. Past Anaxis, the Republic fortified Polemian worlds it still had control over, and these became the main battlefields of the Taiwanese War going forward. The industrial worlds of the core and colonies began churning out weapons and military technology, and Republic colonists from devastated frontier worlds enlisted in the hopes of getting revenge on the marauding Taiwanese. The Republic military itself was quickly transformed from a coalition of local defense forces to a more centralized operation, at least partially. Not much is known about this first iteration of the Republic military. It had two branches, the Republic Navy and the Republic Armies, both of which answered to the Republic Defense Ministry. Over the course of the Taiwanese War, the Republic Navy became centralized and largely homogeneous, with a unified rank structure and order of battle headed by the Admiralty on Forost. The Republic Armies, meanwhile, were a hodgepodge of local militias and mercenary units whose generals usually answered directly to the Defense Ministry. As a result, Republic Army units had virtually no uniformity to speak of. Skill and training varied greatly from unit to unit, and in practice, Republic Army units were usually deployed as extensions of Navy fleet groups. This disorganization, as well as the fact that most battles of the Taiwanese War were naval ones, meant that the Republic military was by far the predominant Republic military branch in these early days. The Taiwanese War lasted for a century, but after the Republic Navy foiled the initial Taiwanese invasion of the core, it was mostly a bloody stalemate, a back-and-forth war along the Polemian trade route. Eventually though, the Republic began to gain the upper hand. This was mostly because the Republic was wealthier and more industrialized than the Taiwan cluster, but the Republic was able to improve these odds even further by convincing the Jedi to join the war effort and by provoking the Hutts into launching raids against the Taiwanese worlds. The Taiwanese refused to give up, however. Instead, as defeat loomed closer, they began to radicalize, carrying out increasingly desperate and vicious attacks on Republic worlds. But this only radicalized the Republic in turn, to the great misfortune of the Taiwanese. The commanders of the Republic Navy decided to pursue a strategy of total war, which eventually allowed it to push all the way back down the Polemian into the Taiwan cluster itself. In 23,900 BBY, the Republic launched a brutal campaign of pressure bombings against the Taiwanese worlds, culminating in a singularly vicious attack on Desavro itself, the capital of the Taiwanese coalition. The Honorable Union of Desavro and Taiwan offered an unconditional surrender, but the Republic Navy initially ignored it, as the Admiralty decided to completely sterilize Desavro as retaliation for all the massacres the Taiwanese had committed, during the conflict. But the Jedi were able to stop this by threatening to cut ties with the Republic, and the Republic accepted the Honorable Union's surrender instead. The Tyone cluster was annexed by the Republic, and after 100 years of fighting, the Tynese War came to an end. But the war's effects would endure for millennia to come. The Tynese War fundamentally transformed the Republic, altering the course of Republic development forever. For starters, the Tynese War made the Republic a galaxy-spanning civilization rather than just another great power. By annexing the Tyone cluster and giving Republic membership to neighboring systems that wanted protection from the Hutts and Tynese, the Republic had evolved beyond a simple coalition of core worlds. This, in turn, forced the Republic to become more centralized, as increased central authority was necessary to coordinate military production and deployment across such a broad tract of space. This began a trend of increased centralization that would persist right up until the Clone Wars. Lastly, the Tynese War forced the Republic to militarize, not just in creating the Republic military, but also by devoting part of its industrial base to military production and by arming the Republic's scouts and traders. All told, the Republic soon became unrecognizable relative to how it had been before the war. But the spirit of the early Republic wasn't completely dead, and some of the changes brought on by the Tynese War were reversed in the following years. Most notably, the Senate actually decided to dissolve the Republic military in the war's aftermath. The Republic's more remote members objected to this, but the wealthy core worlds, who were the majority in the Republic at the time, overruled them. They saw the centralized military as a threat, both because of the brutality it had displayed toward the end of the Tynese War, and because of the increasing centralization it was causing. With the Tynese pacified and the Hutts kept in check for the time being, the core worlds also believed that the military just wasn't necessary anymore. As a result, the Republic military, navy, and army alike was dismantled. The units of the Republic armies returned to their homeworlds and resumed their service as local defense forces, while the Navy's assets and personnel were divided up between Republic member sectors. Only a small naval task force remained under central control, meant to be dispatched as a rapid response unit to deal with threats on the Republic's frontier. It would be assisted in these operations by the Jedi Order, which began dispatching Jedi Watchmen across known space to ensure the safety of Republic member worlds. The Republic would continue to operate without a centralized military for the next 9,000 years, and in that time, the Republic grew rapidly. Following the Tynese War, the Republic went millennia without another major conflict, and this age of peace allowed it to explore and colonize at a staggering pace. The Expansionist era and the Great Manifest period saw the Republic sweep across the stars, expanding deep into the region known as the Slice. But this rapid expansion caused internal problems, and in 17,018 BBY, at the start of the Indector era, these came to a head with the outbreak of the First Alsacan conflict, the start of a long-running series of internal wars between Coruscant and Alsacan for control of the Republic. This conflict was less of a true civil war and more of an internal Cold War with occasional flare-ups. A lukewarm war, if you will. There were calls to re-establish the Republic military during the First Alsacan conflict, but the Senate refused, reasoning that the conflict was bad enough without becoming a full-scale civil war. The First Alsacan conflict ended in 16,700 BBY, but it was only the first of 17 Alsacan conflicts which would go on in the background for most of Republic history. They weren't enough to justify the reformation of the Republic military on their own. It would take an existential threat to convince the Senate to bring the military back. The Dawino-Gwyn contention of 15,500 BBY, in which the Republic was briefly attacked by angry Star Dragons, inspired more calls to bring back the military, but deadlock in the Senate prevented it, and the contention was resolved quickly enough that the calls died down before the Senate got its act together. In the end, it was the increasingly brutal depredations of the Hutts that spurred the Senate to action. The Hutt Empire had been a threat to the Republic since it began pushing out into the Rim, but after the annexation of the Tyone cluster, the Republic had become too powerful for the Hutts to conquer outright. Consequently, despite the ruling clan's certainty that a great war with the Republic was inevitable, the Hutts never launched a full-scale invasion of Republic space. Instead, They carried out a millennia-long campaign of harassment against the Republic's frontier, dispatching slavers and raiders to loot and pillage any colony that they deemed to be too close to Hutt space. The Republic's local security forces, supplemented by the Jedi Order, the Republic's Rapid Response Fleet, and militias like the Belasco Free Volunteers, did the best they could to defend these frontier colonies, battling Hutt-backed raiders on hundreds of worlds. But as the Republic continued to expand toward Hutt space, the frequency of these attacks increased, as did their brutality. The Republic's existing forces were stretched too thin to defend the whole frontier, and many unlucky worlds were ravaged by the Hutt's thralls after being left underdefended. These depredations ultimately left the Senate with no choice. The Republic military had to be reinstated. The New Republic military had the same core structure as the one that had fought in the Taiwanese War. The military was commanded by the Republic Defense Ministry, and it was divided into branches, primarily the Republic Navy and the Republic Armies. Like before, the Republic Armies were a loose collection of local militias and mercenary forces, more an accessory to the Navy than a coherent force in their own right, while the Republic Navy was more centralized, better equipped, and more prestigious, with its admiralty stationed at a new headquarters on Coruscant. The Navy would patrol the Republic's frontier, engaging raider fleets and deploying the armies where they were needed, while the armies would engage the Hutt's minions on the ground, defending colonies or besieging raider bases. The New Republic military also featured a third branch, the Republic Starfighter Corps, which represented the Republic Starfighter Forces. The Starfighter Corps was made a separate branch from the Navy because, at the time it was created, starfighters were mostly deployed in independent squadrons for planetary defense rather than being attached to fleets of capital ships. Though some wings of Starfighter Corps operated alongside the Republic Navy, most of the corps operated from planet-side bases from which the Republic starfighters would provide air support for ground forces or act as snub fighters against enemy forces in orbit. The restored Republic military immediately set to work driving the Hutt raiders from the Republic fringe, and it was extremely successful, partly on its own merits, and partly because the Hutt Empire descended into civil war at roughly the same time the Republic military was re-established. As the Hutt cataclysms ripped the Hutt Empire apart, Hutt raiders ceased to be much of a threat, at least for a time. But this time, the Republic military stuck around after the immediate threat was dealt with. This wasn't just due to political pressure from outlying Republic worlds, but also due to the economic boom that the military's restoration had caused. Starship and weapons manufacturers across the Republic had been awarded large contracts and began churning out hordes of war material, while R&D hubs began making major advances in turbolaser and hyperdrive technology. Anaxis, Byblos, Alantine 6, and Abhine became major naval shipbuilders, while other planets played host to military facilities. The Republic military-industrial complex had come into its own, and so long as it was profitable, the Republic military wasn't going anywhere. From 15,000 to 12,000 BBY, during the Kaimudon era, the Republic military, particularly the Navy, battled slavers, pirates, and other outlaws in the depths of the Rim, winning renown in battles at Esaga, Kalbon, and the Sundered Vale. After the Hutts, now operating as the Hutt Cartel, recovered from their civil war and resumed their raids on the Republic frontier, the Republic military was there to turn their attacks aside. The military kept the Republic safe from any and all external threats, but unfortunately for the Republic, external threats were the least of its worries in this period. Throughout the Kaimudon era, corruption began to run rampant in the Republic as megacorporations seized ever more power and Hutt criminal outfits began buying out sector governments. The Republic became increasingly dysfunctional, and unrest over this state of affairs grew rapidly. Power-hungry groups took advantage of this to their own ends, and this culminated with a cult known as the Pius Dea seizing the levers of power in the Republic to the misfortune of the entire galaxy. In 11,987 BBY, after the impeachment and assassination of the tremendously corrupt Supreme Chancellor Perslia, the Senate elected Contis Pex I as his replacement. Contis Pex was a native Coruscanti who had been a prominent member of the Coruscant Merchants Guild before becoming a senator, and he was a champion of the Pius Dea faith. a religion that had sprung up on Coruscant centuries prior. The Pius Dea worshipped a deity they knew only as the goddess, and their faith was built on the notion that communities could protect themselves from corruption by strictly policing themselves. The Pius Dea were obsessed with the concepts of purity and perfection, and they were quick to write off what they considered imperfect as irredeemable and needing to be purged. In addition, the Pius Dea were strongly humanocentrist, considering non-humans to be imperfect at best and a source of corruption at worst, a sentiment that would become all too common in the Republic under Contispex. All throughout his career, Contispex I had been a fanatical devotee of the Pius Dea religion, known for his faith-fueled opposition to corruption and intolerance of those who didn't share his high moral standards. This was what had allowed him to become Supreme Chancellor. He stood in stark contrast to the culture of corruption that had taken root in the Senate, and many believed he would be able to clean up the government. Instead, Contispex I transformed the Republic into a Pius Dea theocracy. After becoming Supreme Chancellor, Contispex began conducting purges of the government. At first, this was ostensibly aimed at eliminating corruption, but it quickly became apparent that Contispex was just replacing one form of corruption with an even worse one. Contispex handed vacant government posts over to fellow Pius Dea zealots, and before long, he began purging Republic leadership of non-humans and anyone who refused to convert to the Pius Dea faith. In just a few decades, most positions of power in the Republic were reserved for Pius Dea leaders, and these positions would become hereditary, passed down through generations of Pius Dea lunatics. Thus began the Pius Dea era, one of the darkest ages of Republic history, during which the cult would rule for 1,000 years. The evil of the Pius Dea leached into just about every facet of the Republic, the military included. The Republic Navy in particular became a Pius Dea stronghold, its upper ranks filled with some of the most zealous Pius Dea leaders, and Contispex would use the Navy's zealotry to unleash a millennium of war upon the galaxy. In accordance with the Pius Dea's belief that aliens were impure and that impurities needed to be purged, Contispex sought to use the Navy to wage wars of extermination and conquest against the Republic's non-human neighbors. Consequently, in 11,965 BBY, he declared war on the Hutts, beginning the first of 34 Pius Dea crusades. Over the course of the era, the Republic military transformed from a professional peacekeeping force into a horde of bloodthirsty crusaders. Pius Dea commissars were attached to all military units, conducting inquisitions to expose and purge apostates, heretics, and alien sympathizers, just as the Pius Dea's politicians were doing in the Senate. These enemies of the Pius Dea were named proscribed by the cult, and their entire families were forbidden from joining the military or holding political power for 3 generations, ensuring that power remained firmly in the hands of the Pius Dea. The proscribed were replaced by legions of Pius Dea zealots who were incentivized to join the military both by their religious leaders and by special privileges that the Pius Dea Republic gave its crusaders. The quality of the Republic military declined as a result of this. The Republic armies in particular became full of poorly trained crusaders who were little more than legitimized pirates. Violent and bloodthirsty beings who carried out innumerable massacres and pillaged worlds in the name of the goddess. In the Navy, the corruption was similarly extreme. By 11,500 BBY, most of the Republic Navy consisted of sinister, black-armored cathedral ships, which were commanded by missionaries instead of proper naval officers, and which functioned more like cultish pirate ships than military vessels. The crew of many of these cathedral ships spent their whole lives aboard them, passing down their positions to their children when they died, such that entire generations lived and died aboard these sinister vessels without ever leaving. During the Pius Dea era, the Republic military operated primarily from ordnance/regional depots spread across the Republic frontier. Identified by the prefix Ord, these worlds were crusader colonies that served both as strongholds of Pius Dea zealotry and major military bases, and they were the backbone of the Pius Dea crusades. The ordnance/regional depots served as mustering grounds for crusader forces, where fleets would gather and take on ground forces before departing for planets the Pius Dea wanted to plunder. Upon arriving at a target world, the Navy's armored men o' war, supported by the primitive bywings of the Starfighter Corps, would engage hostile naval forces, while the Cathedral ships would deploy millions of ground troops on the target world's surface. On the ground, the armies would engage in bloody trench warfare with hostile forces. If they triumphed, they would swarm into population centers with cries of, "The goddess wills it," sacking and destroying everything in their path. The plunder taken from these infidel worlds would be loaded onto Navy galleons for transport back to Coruscant, and the surviving natives would come under brutal martial law. For 1,000 years, these bloody wars raged all across the galaxy as Supreme Chancellor Contispex and his successors, all of whom took the name Contispex, declared crusades left and right. Of the 34 Pius Deo crusades, at least 4 were launched against the Hutts and their client species, including both the first and the last. Other crusades targeted other prominent species that lived beyond the Republic's borders, including the Zabraks, Ithorians, Tyrosans, and Baragwin. Still others targeted Republic member species that the government deemed impure, including the Sterebs, the Hergliks, the Zarancines, the Bothans, and the Laniks. Entire species were exterminated by the Crusaders, while the rest were enslaved. But while the Republic military unleashed hell upon the galaxy, those opposed to the Pius Dea slowly began to organize. In 11,820 BBY, Alsacan and its allies once again broke from the Republic, beginning the 6th Alsacan conflict, and the Alsacani coalition soon allied with other powerful factions that were also opposed to the Pius Dea. They made common cause with the Duros, the Hergliks, the Kamasi, the Jedi, and even the Hutts, and this Pius Dea haters club soon began laying plans to bring down the cult once and for all. Their plans hinged on one important variable: retaking control of the Republic military. Now, this was a lot easier said than done. The Republic military had been firmly under Crusader control for centuries, but around 11,100 BBY, an opportunity began to open up for the anti-Pius Dea camp. As the momentum of the Crusades began to stall, the Pius Dea had embarked on a campaign of inquisitions, shredding the cult's own power base and spreading bitter divisions among Pius Dea adherents. The Jedi, Kamasi, and Alsacani took advantage of this by inventing a secret heresy and spreading it among the ranks of the Pius Dea, particularly in the Republic Navy. Adherents of this heresy, known as the Renunciates, found a leader in Admiral Pers Predu, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Republic Navy. Predu established a secret base for fellow Renunciate naval officers on Prefspelt 4, a secret world that had been colonized by Republic citizens fleeing Pius Dea oppression, and there, the Renunciates plotted with the Jedi and their allies to bring down the government. In 10,967 BBY, the conspirators declared themselves, beginning the Renunciation, a civil war within the Pius Dea. In a brief but bloody conflict, the Pius Dea tore itself apart as the Renunciates and the Faithful battled one another aboard cathedral ships, ordnance/regional depots, and even in government offices. The Jedi led fleets of Alsacani, Duros, Herglik, and Hutt warships against Faithful stronghold worlds, and with their support, the Renunciates quickly gained the upper hand. Fighting nonetheless lasted for a year before the Renunciates deployed their trump card, the Bureau of Ships and Services. The Bureau was responsible for, among other things, ensuring that Starship's navigational charts were up to date, and this made it one of the most powerful institutions in the entire galaxy. So important that not even the Pius Dea had dared to mess with it. When the Bureau decided to support the Renunciates, they seeded the navicomputers of every ship in the Pius Dea Faithful's fleet with rogue navicomputer code, and a year into the Renunciation, they activated it. On the Bureau's signal, every ship controlled by the Faithful jumped to hyperspace. Most of the fleet was sent in random directions. Many ships were steered into stars or black holes, while others were sent deep into interstellar space. Those that survived this jump had their navicomputers, hyperdrives, and communication systems disabled upon exiting hyperspace, and their crews were left to starve to death in the vast emptiness of space. Only the vanguard of the Pius Dea was spared this fate. It was instead redirected to Yuquine, where the combined fleets of the Renunciates and their allies were waiting. In the Battle of Yuquine, the faithful were utterly annihilated, and Contes Pex the 19th was captured by the Jedi. He was put on trial and sentenced to life in prison on Camas, while the Jedi, the Renunciates, and their allies set to work rebuilding the Republic. Following the fall of the Pius Dea, the Jedi took over the Republic, installing Grand Master Beal Ductavus as Supreme Chancellor. Ductavus, the Jedi, and their allies set to work purging the Pius Dea from leadership and rebuilding the Republic. Despite the damage the cult had done, Ductavus did an excellent job, and by the end of the Ductavus era in 9000 BBY, the Republic was back together, much of the damage caused by the Crusades had healed, and the Pius Dea religion was extinct. Many Republic institutions had to be rebuilt from the ground up in order to cleanse them of Pius Dea influence, and one of these institutions was the Republic military. For a millennium, the military had been the favorite tool of the Crusaders, thoroughly corrupted by Pius Dea influence and responsible for unspeakable crimes. It not only had to be purged of the Pius Dea, but it also had to regain the trust of the innumerable peoples it had wounded, and that meant major reform. These reforms would be overseen by none other than Admiral Pers Predu, the Renunciate's most revered war hero. Shortly after the end of the Renunciation, Predu met with the other Renunciate naval officers on Pressbelt 4 to plan out the reorganization of the Republic Navy. For the most part, they just reverted the changes the Pius Dea had made to the Navy, scrapping their cathedral ships and ending the use of generation crews in favor of a return to a more professional fighting force. But they made a number of innovations as well, instituting a slew of new traditions, internal structures, and changes to the Navy's organization. These changes would go on to define the Republic Navy for the rest of its existence, and the naval traditions laid down by Predu would continue to be honored even by the Imperial Navy. The Navy's headquarters was also moved from Coruscant to Anaxis at around this time, while a new Republic Naval Academy was established on Pressbelt itself. Within a few generations, the transformation of the Republic Navy was complete, and the institution was professional, efficient, and widely respected once again. In the millennia that followed, the Navy would go back to patrolling the edges of Republic territory, protecting frontier worlds, and hunting down slavers and raiders. A similar transformation took place in the Republic Starfighter Corps, while the Republic armies were purged of their Crusader units and more or less returned to their pre-Pius Dea status. During the reorganization of the Republic armies, a new unit began to rise to prominence within the military, the Rocket Jumper Elite Advance Unit. This unit's elite soldiers would use rocket packs to drop from orbit onto target planets, landing in the thick of enemy forces and clearing out landing zones for other Republic army units to follow in their path. The rocket jumpers had come about in 11,000 BBY in response to advances in jetpack technology, and during the Renunciation, they had sided with the Renunciates. The rocket jumpers played a vital role in a major Jedi victory on Ord Carida, and after the fall of the Pius Dea, they became a prestigious unit known as the best the Republic armies had to offer. The armies weren't the only part of the Republic military to benefit from advances in technology either. Advances in starfighter technology allowed the Starfighter Corps' bi-wings to play a more prominent role in naval battles, while capital ship technology had been steadily advancing for millennia. The guided missiles and torpedoes once favored by capital ships were becoming more powerful, while turbo lasers and laser cannons were becoming more accurate. The defensive measures favored by older capital ships, such as point defense missiles, curium-coated plating, laser-diffusing particle clouds, and good old-fashioned armor, were being replaced by energy shields. Shields had been around for some time, but for millennia, military-grade shield generators had been too power-intensive to install on all but the largest capital ships. Now, advances in shield technology meant that just about any capital ship could be shielded. In the wake of the Pius Dea era, two lesser-known wars would see Republic military technology advance even further. The first of these took place in 10,000 BBY, and it pitted the Republic against the Kulmari Empire. This was a small realm of a few dozen star systems ruled by the warlord Val Komori, and it would likely have been a historical footnote were it not for its fleet of planet-buster battleships. These were enormous capital ships armed with similarly enormous mass driver cannons, which were designed to fire asteroids at high velocities toward enemy targets. These weapons could pulverize enemy capital ships with a single hit, and they could unleash apocalyptic bombardments against enemy planets, making them effective weapons of terror. The Komori battleships terrorized a number of frontier worlds before the Republic Navy was sent in to deal with the invaders. The Komori Empire was ultimately destroyed, but Komori's legacy lived on in the Republic Navy. The Navy adopted many of Komori's innovations, including the use of mass driver cannons, as well as less flashy but arguably more important advances in targeting and hyperdrive technology. The last and most advanced of the Komori battleship designs, the 3-kilometer-long Cal-class battleship, was straight up adopted by the Republic Navy. For a brief time, Komori's mass drivers were an unstoppable ultimate weapon, as no shield technology known to the Republic was strong enough to protect against them. As Komori's old toys spread, they thus became feared as military trump cards. Mass drivers were used by both sides in the 10th Alsacan conflict, most infamously in the Osara Municide, in which the Republic Navy bombed an Alsacani colony in the northern dependencies to the point of lifelessness. Fortunately, the rise of mass driver technology spurred rapid advances in planetary defenses. In the 9400s BBY, the first planetary shields were developed, rendering Komori-style mass driver cannons obsolete, and the development of ground-to-space turbolasers, ion cannons, and hypervelocity cannons provided further protection against attacking capital ships. By the start of the Remilitarization period in 9000 BBY, this new technological equilibrium meant that peace was able to return to the galaxy, more or less. That peace didn't last long, however, as the subsequent Sub-Terra period saw new advances in military technology, spurred on by another of the Republic's wars, the Waymancy Storm. This conflict began in 7811 BBY when the Republic first made contact with a new civilization in the Waymancy Hollow, a remote region on the edge of the northern dependencies. This first contact ended with the Republic's ships being utterly destroyed, for the Waymancy Hollow was the territory of the Signatories of the Waymancy, an enigmatic alliance dedicated to stopping the Republic's expansion. The signatories included the Sisters of the Machinesmith, the Mercenary Army of World Point 6, the Nests of Neshtub, and the Wives of Tingrippa, a diverse bunch, but united by the goal of destroying the Republic. To that end, the Sisters of the Machinesmith had spent the Remilitarization period studying Republic military technology and improving on it in every possible way, such that, when the war began, the Republic was completely outmatched. The signatories of Waymancy had superior energy weapons, with greater yields and faster rates of fire than anything in the Republic arsenal, and their power generators were extremely efficient. Waymancy ships were faster, and their shields were strong enough to effortlessly absorb almost everything the Republic threw at them. The Republic outnumbered the enemy 100 to 1, but the signatories outfought them time and again, and the Republic military was only able to pull off a few victories at incredible loss. Fortunately, scientists on Axum reverse-engineered the signatories' technology, and volunteers from rimworlds affected by the conflict poured into the Republic military and fought the conquerors with unmatched courage. The battleships of the Republic Navy and the fearless rocket jumpers put an end to the Waymancy Storm, utterly crushing the signatories of Waymancy and conquering their worlds. In the aftermath of the Waymancy Storm, Republic scientists continued to reverse engineer the enemy's technology and even improve upon it further. This led to the development of the squint pipe process, which improved both energy weaponry and energy shields. In the ensuing centuries, the Republic armies began arming their soldiers with state-of-the-art pulse wave blasters, while the Republic Navy began fielding capital ships armed with high-yield, fast-firing turbolasers. For a time, capital ship-grade turbolasers were powerful enough that deflector shields became useless, but further advances led to more efficient shields that could stand up to the new generation of capital ship weapons. The advancements also allowed smaller starships to be shielded, and the Republic Navy went from relying primarily on massive battleships to a mix of battleships, cruisers, and smaller gunships. By the start of the Mandaron period in 7000 BBY, the Republic was unchallenged as the dominant power in the galaxy, and its military was unrivaled in terms of technology and manpower. The Republic armies and their elite rocket jumpers kept the peace, while the Starfighter Corps and the Navy patrolled the stars, keeping raiders out of Republic space. The Republic military as we know it had come into its own. But a military threat the likes of which the Republic had never seen was just over the horizon, and it would spark millennia of war that would see the Republic military forced to rapidly adapt. It began with a second Great Schism in 7000 BBY, which led to the 100-Year Darkness, a century-long war between the Jedi and a sect of Dark Jedi that had unleashed dark side monsters upon the galaxy. In 6900 BBY, the Dark Jedi were defeated and exiled, but in the depths of the Outer Rim, they would found a new galactic power, one hell-bent on destroying the Republic and exacting revenge on the Jedi. This power, the Sith Empire, would bide its time for thousands of years, but before long, it would make itself known to the Republic and a new era of warfare would begin. For most of its history, the Galactic Republic enjoyed peace, more or less, and galactic wars were few and far between. But in its final 5 millennia, the galaxy would become a much more war-torn place as the Sith, Mandalorians, and other hostile factions launched war after war. This forced the Republic military to adapt much more rapidly than it did in previous eras, as the pressures of war led to advances in military technology and tactics. Before we dive into the chaos of the Sith Wars, let's quickly take a step back and review what the Republic military looked like circa 5000 BBY. After 10,000 years of continuous evolution, the Republic's military technology had seen considerable advancements in pretty much every respect, and its traditions and organization had seen change as well. For the most part though, the basic structure of the Republic military was consistent throughout this period. The military was divided into 3 branches: the Republic Navy, the Republic Armies, and the Republic Starfighter Corps. All of these answered to the Republic Ministry of Defense, headed by the Minister of Defense, which, in turn, reported to the Galactic Senate, which had subcommittees for oversight and procurement for each branch. The Republic Navy was the core of the Republic military, the most prestigious, well-funded, and well-equipped of the 3 branches. The Republic Navy was mostly centralized, and by 5000 BBY, it had many time-honored traditions. The Republic Navy was allowed to unilaterally involve itself in violent unrest and armed conflict throughout Republic space, and it was also tasked with intercepting any external threats. Planetary governments could also call in the Navy if they needed its assistance, though they would have to get Senate approval for actions that would take more than a week. The Navy controlled millions of capital ships. Most of the Navy appears to have consisted of light to medium cruisers at around this time, but it also operated everything from small, speedy gunships to much larger core galaxy systems dreadnoughts and Cal-class battleships. Each vessel was commanded by a captain, or a commander for small vessels, and they were usually deployed as part of much larger fleets, which were commanded by admirals. Republic rear admirals, vice admirals, and full admirals commanded fleets of different sizes, and each fleet had its own theater of operations, typically covering several sectors. The largest fleets were the defense forces assigned to the core sectors, which were each commanded by an admiral of the core worlds. Admirals of the core worlds answered to their sector's planetary government and had no real authority outside their own sector, leading many in the Republic Navy to see it as a dead-end rank, a political title usually given to elderly officers as a retirement position. Many high-ranking officers from the core worlds declared themselves as having no homeworld to avoid being named an Admiral of the core worlds. Most instead aspired to the rank of Admiral of the Fleet, the highest rank in the Republic Navy. The Admiral of the Fleet commanded the entire Republic Navy, making them arguably the most powerful person in the galaxy. Though the Naval Admiralty was stationed at the Anaxis Citadel, the Admiral of the fleet had their office on Coruscant, as they usually worked directly with the Defense Ministry. The Admiral of the fleet had total authority over naval deployment, although lesser admirals were typically left with plenty of freedom within their assigned theaters. Below these upper ranks were many millions of enlisted personnel and junior officers drawn from all over the Republic. Naval recruits were trained at the Republic Naval Academy on Prefspelt 4, following which officer candidates would receive further training at the Naval Academy on Coruscant or the prestigious Anaxis War College. Enlisted personnel began their careers as midshipmen, while officers started as ensigns, though most quickly received a promotion to lieutenant, such that one old Sith Wars era aphorism claimed that the galaxy would run out of stars to explore before the Navy ran out of lieutenants. The Navy often operated alongside the Republic Starfighter Corps, which was similar in many respects but much less prestigious. The Starfighter Corps mostly operated planet-based snub fighter squadrons at this point in time. It acted as a first line of defense for Republic worlds, holding off hostile forces until the Navy could show up. The Starfighter Corps also attached small squadrons of space superiority fighters to Republic fleets. In 5000 BBY, it favored the nimble S-100 Stinger-class starfighter. Starfighters were becoming increasingly viable in naval warfare around this time, and in the early years of the Sith Wars, they would go from an accessory to a necessity for naval forces. The Starfighter Corps primarily operated in squadrons, which were led into battle by commanders. Lastly, there were the Republic armies. The armies were still a bit of a chaotic affair, as they always had been, but by 5000 BBY, they were steadily becoming a bit more centralized. Nonetheless, the armies were, at this time, still mostly made up of local militias and even some mercenary units, with only a few permanent centralized units. Prior to the Mandalorian Wars, Admiral Veltra put it bluntly: the Republic would rather rent than own. As a consequence, each division of the Republic armies was pretty much a separate army in its own right, and its generals answered directly to the Defense Ministry or even to the upper ranks of the Republic Navy, upon which the armies were often dependent. Army units were usually attached to fleets of the Navy in wartime for convenience, which army officers sometimes took issue with. The Republic armies were more uniform than they used to be by 5000 BBY, but they still varied considerably in terms of skill and training. Regular militia units were often poorly trained and poorly equipped, while the army's elite divisions fared much better. Pay and conditions were almost always worse than they were for the Navy, leading to cultural clashes between the two branches and recruitment issues for the armies. In wartime, the Republic alleviated the latter problem by hiring mercenaries and offering considerable sign-on bonuses for army recruits, but these were both band-aids rather than solutions. Training varied between the different units of the Republic armies, but elite recruits were usually sent to one of a few prestigious training academies, among them the Raithal Academy, the Korolug Academy, and the Karida Academy. The different armies had different ranks, although by 5000 BBY they were slowly becoming more uniform. For instance, most army units lacked the ranks of lieutenant, captain, and colonel to avoid confusion with Republic Navy ranks. Generally, army ranks fell into three categories. At the bottom were army troopers, the rank and file personnel of the Republic armies. Above them were army officers, field officers tasked with commanding small units, who usually held ranks analogous to corporal or sergeant. Above them were army brigadiers, the highest ranking ground officers who usually commanded from the rear lines. Brigadiers answered to the army's top ranks, which were usually led by generals. Due to the army's lack of uniformity, however, the top ranks of many units included more bizarre and unusual titles, such as Grand Zenog and Grey Chieftain. Different unit sizes varied widely as well, although not as much as ranks. In most armies, army troopers were organized into squads of 8 to 10 soldiers, which were commanded by a sergeant and or corporal. Most armies also had battalions commanded by a major or an equivalent rank. These consisted of 25 to 40 squads. 4 to 9 battalions made up a brigade, led by a brigadier. These units were often attached to Navy fleets and they usually handled full-scale battles. If more than one brigade was present on a planet, they would be grouped together into a corps, which would be led by a general. These units were mostly informal, however, and generals typically just relayed orders from the Defense Ministry to the different brigadiers. Within the Republic armies, there were a number of different specializations and elite units. Alongside standard ground units, the armies included marine units attached to capital ships, as well as army recon commandos, which operated in small, elite units tasked with independent operations in hostile territory. Ground units were often supported by armored divisions, which operated tanks, walkers, and other heavy vehicles, while especially lucky ground units would be reinforced by the Republic Army's Special Forces. Special Forces units, unlike typical army units, were usually organized, centralized, and operated on a galactic scale. The most elite of these Special Forces units was the Rocket Jumper Elite Advanced Unit, a force of well-trained commandos equipped with rocket packs that allowed them to drop down onto enemy positions from orbit. They were the Star Wars version of Halo's ODSTs, tasked with establishing beachheads, carrying out precision strikes, extracting VIPs, breaking sieges, and other high-risk duties. As a consequence, only the Republic's best were allowed to become rocket jumpers. In combat, rocket jumpers were disciplined and determined, known for their insistence on completing their missions or dying while attempting them. Out of combat, they were known for their odd, reckless, and often destructive behavior, to the point where the places on Coruscant where rocket jumpers congregated had the highest insurance rates in the galaxy. All told, the Republic military was in pretty good shape, but it would be put to the test when the long-forgotten Sith returned to the greater galaxy. In 5000 BBY, using a secret hyperspace route from the deep core to Korriban, known as the Daragon Trail, an enormous Sith armada appeared in the Koros system at the heart of the Republic. Before the Republic could react, the Dark Lord of the Sith, Naga Sadow, had begun a siege of the 7 worlds of the Koros system, and his fleets had spread into the core worlds, attacking Medalos, Basilisk, Thokos, Shulkin, and even Coruscant itself. Taken completely by surprise, the Republic military, even with the assistance of the Jedi Knights, struggled to fend off the Sith. In space and in the skies, the Navy's cruisers dueled jagged-hulled Sith battleships, unshielded but heavily armed, while Stinger starfighters dueled the Sith's Blade-class interceptors. On the ground, the Republic armies, the rocket jumpers, and even the Jedi Knights gave ground to vast hordes of red-skinned Massassi berserkers, Sith lords with terrible powers, and mighty war beasts. Once the initial shock of the invasion wore off, Republic forces began to recover their momentum. The Navy began to make headway against the Sith fleet with flanking maneuvers, while Jedi leadership helped the armies stop the Massassi advance. Even then, the Sith might have toppled the Republic had Naga Sadow's would-be apprentice, Gav Daragon, not turned against him. When Daragon confronted Sadow, he interrupted the Dark Lord's meditation, and in an instant, most of the attacking Sith forces vanished, revealed to be illusionary duplicates conjured up by Sith sorcery. This not only suddenly depleted the numbers of the Sith, but it left the Sith's genuine forces scattered and out of position, allowing the Jedi and the military to promptly trounce them. Sadow and his forces had no choice but to flee back to the Sith Empire, where a brutal civil war erupted among the Sith Lords. By the time the Republic Navy had caught its breath and decided to pursue the invaders, much of the Sith fleet had been reduced to a debris field over Korriban, and the rest soon fell before the Republic Navy's superior numbers and technology. The Republic military, assisted by the Jedi Order, then carried out a counter-invasion of Sith space in which the Sith Empire was destroyed and its society imploded. The threat of the Sith was over for a time. The Great Hyperspace War was brief, and the Republic military acquitted itself well in the fighting. Nonetheless, it served as a wake-up call for the Republic, a warning that there were still powerful, existential threats out in the Rim, and in the ensuing centuries, the Republic military would be forced to evolve. These changes were spurred on by other crises that sprung up across the Republic in the post-Mandaron period, among them the Gank Massacres, the Third Great Schism, the Kakeli Reconquista, the Great Droid Revolution, and the Beast Wars of Onderon. Toward the start of this period, the Republic Navy adopted a number of new capital ship classes, including several classes of enormous battleships, while the Starfighter Corps began deploying more agile Star Saber snub fighters alongside its smaller Stingers. The Republic armies saw perhaps the biggest change, as it began to experiment with the deployment of battle droids alongside its organic troops. Most prominently, these Republic battle droids included the fearsome Juggernaut war droids, which were designed to work alongside the rocket jumpers. For centuries, these droids became the pride and joy of the Republic armies, but this changed rather quickly during the Great Droid Revolution of 4015 BBY, in which the Juggernauts crushed the rocket jumpers in an aerial battle on Coruscant. The Great Droid Revolution was eventually crushed, and the Juggernauts were defeated in the end, but the incident left much of the Republic wary of droids for decades to come. Battle droids were phased out of the Republic military for a time, although they would soon be back. Across the board, the Republic military saw advances, but they weren't entirely sufficient. By 4000 BBY, the Navy's ships were becoming outdated once again, while the disorganization of the Republic armies was impeding the Republic's ability to respond to the increasing number of crises it was facing. The flaws in the Republic military would soon be laid bare by the greatest war the Republic had seen to date, a stress test that would force the Republic military to radically transform. The Great Sith War. In 3996 BBY, a new generation of Sith went to war against the Republic. These Sith weren't alien invaders, but fallen Jedi who had reclaimed the heritage of the ancient Sith, taking command of Massassi armies and powerful Sith artifacts. They were allied with the Mandalorian Crusaders, the Krath cult of the Koros system, and the Macrosa Order, and their Dark Lord, Exar Kun, lured many young Jedi to his cause, sparking a civil war within the Jedi Order. Their war against the Republic would push the galactic government to its breaking point, and it would have a lasting impact on galactic history. The Sith coalition in the Great Sith War aimed to destabilize the Republic by causing chaos across a wide swath of space, and the Republic military struggled to respond. Its outdated warships and starfighters were outmatched by those of the Mandalorians, while its armies simply weren't centralized enough to be everywhere the Republic needed them to be. Mandalorian advances tore through the Republic's remote territories, while the Krath Holy Crusade cut a bloody swath through the Republic's heart. While the military was rushing to the Rim to respond to these crises, the Krath attacked Coruscant, which was only spared from Sith occupation by scheming within the upper echelons of the Sith hierarchy. The Sith lured much of the Republic Navy into a deadly trap at Kemplex 9, and they even destroyed Ossus, the homeworld of the Jedi Order. The damage to the Republic was immense, and the military suffered terrible casualties, but within a few months of the war's beginning, it was eventually able to recover and respond. Following the failed Krath assault on Coruscant, the Republic Navy rallied in the core, and armadas were dispatched to halt key Sith offensives. One Republic fleet stopped the Mandalorian Crusaders' advance above Iridonia, while the Corellian fleet drove the Krath from the Corellian Run. The Republic's Swift fleet won a string of victories across the slice, scattering Sith forces and forcing Exar Kun to retreat to his stronghold on Yavin 4. There, he was pinned down by the Republic Rim fleet and ultimately destroyed. With Exar Kun gone, the Sith coalition crumbled, and by the end of the year, the Great Sith War was over. Like the previous war with the Sith, the Great Sith War was brief, but it was much more destructive to the Republic, its military especially. The early battles of the war and the disaster at Kemplex 9 had inflicted terrible losses on the Republic military, and more importantly, the war as a whole showed that the military was in serious need of an overhaul. This time, the Republic military would be subjected to much more extensive changes than it had been previously. In the 20 years after the Great Sith War, the Republic overhauled virtually its entire arsenal, and it began to adjust the organization of its military as well. Marketed as the Generation Tomorrow overhaul, this brief period saw rapid advancements in military technology, paving the way for a new era of warfare. This era of rebuilding saw the Republic's full military-industrial complex mobilized behind revitalizing the Republic military. The shipyards of Foros, Rendili, Kuat, Fondor, Salust, Corellia, and Vento began churning out new starfighters and capital ships, while new small arms were rushed into production on Arcania, Bothwoi, Duro, and Coruscant. New technologies, such as advanced navicomputers that could calculate hyperspace jumps without relying on hyperspace beacons, became commonplace. Even the military's aesthetics started to change, with Republic military personnel donning bright new orange and black jumpsuits and dress uniforms. In the image on screen, you can see 4 examples of these new uniforms. From left to right, you have a Republic soldier, a Republic pilot, a Republic Army officer, and a Republic Navy officer. Of the 3 branches of the Republic military, the Starfighter Corps was the least affected by the overhaul, despite being the branch that the Generation Tomorrow project started for. The Starfighter Corps got new starfighters, most importantly the iconic Aurek-class tactical strike fighter, but its structure remained intact, and the only organizational change in its deployment was that the Corps began deploying its squadrons more frequently in naval combat. Since the Aurek and the new Chela-class starfighter were hyperspace capable, they were able to carry out independent, long-range operations and accompany fleet groups on a wider variety of missions, increasing their combat utility. The Navy began deploying its attached fighter squadrons much more often at around this time, employing the new Aureks and fighter screens, attack wings, and scout units. The era of modern starfighter warfare was beginning, and though the Starfighter Corps continued to maintain its in-system squadrons, it slowly but surely was functioning more as an extension of the Navy. Speaking of, the Republic Navy threw out pretty much its entire fleet after the Great Sith War, replacing it with new fleets of state-of-the-art Hammerhead-class cruisers, Foray-class blockade runners, Axehead-class frigates, and Inexpungible-class command ships. This was the start of a shift away from the huge, ponderous battleships of previous eras and towards fleets composed of smaller, more agile cruisers and frigates that could be manufactured and deployed in large numbers. Larger cruisers and battleships remained in small numbers, including the new inexpungible command ships, but Navy battle doctrines strongly emphasized these smaller vessels. The Navy's command structure remained largely the same, but the structure and deployment of its fleets changed to account for their new composition. But perhaps the biggest changes happened in the Republic armies. At long last, the armies began to centralize, slowly but inexorably. Uniforms, equipment, and training began to be standardized, and the different army units steadily began to adopt common rank structures and orders of battle. The Republic armies were even officially renamed to the Republic Army, and though it still functioned in a semi-decentralized manner, the army was well on its way to becoming a much more unified force. Army units still tended to function as extensions of fleet groups, and some were even attached to fleets as marine detachments, but a unified Republic army was nonetheless coming into being. The Republic army also saw an overhaul of nearly all of its equipment. Republic soldiers not only received new uniforms, but also new breath masks, protective gear, optional cybernetic implants, and in some cases, even stealth fuel generators. The pulse wave blasters the armies had used for millennia were replaced by new, superior modern blasters, while officers were issued new vibroblades with cortosis weaves for use in self-defense against lightsaber-wielding attackers. The Republic Army also reintroduced battle droids into its lineup at around this time. These became increasingly common in Republic ranks throughout the old Sith Wars, especially as the Republic began suffering serious manpower shortages. By 3970 BBY, as the Republic continued to recover from the Great Sith War, this new and improved Republic military was ready for action. It would be tested sooner rather than later, for even as the final stages of this military overhaul were taking place, the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders began conquering star systems beyond the borders of Republic space. The Senate decided to ignore these expansions, as the Mandalorians were avoiding Republic worlds, and so the Republic did nothing while the Mandalorians built up an empire. After a decade of expansion, they had created a mighty war machine in the Outer Rim, and the reigning Mandalore was rallying his troops for what he claimed would be the most glorious crusade of all, a full-scale invasion of the Republic. In 3966 BBY, the Mandalorians finally began to encroach on Republic territory, advancing toward the city planet Taris, a non-Republic world with strong Republic trade ties. But when they did, the unthinkable happened. The Senate did something. It dispatched a massive portion of the Republic Navy to establish the Jebel Vanquo Tanith Line, a massive security cordon around Taris. In the words of Saul Karath, one of the fleet captains sent to participate in the security cordon, Mandalore spends years picking off unaligned rimworlds. The Senate sits. Mandalore gets too close to one full of Republic business interests, and the Senate throws at Republic membership and a security cordon so long it would take 5 fleets our size to crew it. At last, the Mandalorians could go no farther without engaging the Republic head-on. The Mandalorian advance halted. For the next 8 months, apart from a few minor skirmishes in the territory between the Line and Mandalorian space, the Mandalorians and the Republic simply waited, staring each other down. Republic military analysts believed that they had stopped the Mandalorians' expansion. They would prove tragically wrong. In 3964 BBY, out of nowhere, the Mandalorians launched a massive invasion of Republic space, attacking in 3 separate sectors all at once. In the Taris Theater, the Mandalorians unleashed an all-out assault on Vanquo, causing other units on the Jebel Vanquo Tanith line to break away to reinforce Vanquo, allowing a second Mandalorian fleet to slip through and attack Taris. Republic forces were thrown into complete disarray, and in the confusion, the Mandalorians were able to utterly destroy many of the fleets assigned to the line, significantly depleting the Republic Navy's strength. In the end, the Republic not only lost Vanquo, but also Taris, Jebel, and Tanith, and from there, the Mandalorians pushed further into Republic space. Mandalorian fleets annihilated further Republic units in the Tyon cluster and the Northern dependencies, and the invasion of the Republic, the true beginning of the Mandalorian Wars, kicked off. This initial attack, known as the Onslaught, dealt the Republic military terrible casualties, and from there, the Republic military rapidly lost control of the situation. The Mandalorians pressed the offensive, and Republic forces were crushed again and again, massacred at Sirocco, at Eris III, and even at Duro, where the Navy failed to deny the Neo-Crusaders entry to the core worlds. For all its new toys, the Republic military was badly outmatched by the Mandalorians, who had even better technology, fiercer warriors, and above all, more ruthless tacticians. Whole Republic armies were destroyed, fleet groups were lost, and most of the Republic's remaining large battleships were destroyed. Desperate, the Senate begged the Jedi Council for aid, but the Council refused to get involved as the Order's numbers were still recovering from the Great Sith War. But, as you surely know by now, 2 young Jedi Knights named Revan and Malak disagreed with the Council's decision and rallied a group of like-minded Jedi to join the fight anyway. In 3962 BBY, after the Mandalorians took Duro, Supreme Chancellor Tol Kressa named Revan and Malak the supreme commanders of the entire Republic military, while their followers were made generals. Their entry into the war would be a turning point, and it would see further changes in the structure of the Republic military. Around the time Revan and Malak joined the war, the Navy once again switched tactics. Its strategy of fleets of small cruisers led by massive command ships hadn't worked too well against the Mandalorians' destroyers, so the Republic rushed 2 larger capital ship classes into production to fill the middle ground between the 2 types of ships. These were the Centurion-class battlecruiser, a smaller and less unwieldy command ship that replaced the Inexpungible, and the Interdictor-class cruiser, a heavy cruiser that had the added bonus of being able to prevent enemy vessels from jumping to hyperspace. These new ships proved their worth in Revan's first major operation, a counterattack above Duro in which they prevented the Mandalorian fleet from escaping the system with a cache of stolen war material. New Republic war droids also began to be deployed at around this time, including tank droids that evened the odds a little against the Mandalorian's Beskar-clad crusaders. More importantly though, The Revanchists provided the Republic military with new leadership, and the military was reorganized to account for them. The Republic Army was formally reorganized into a singular unit, with its largest components each led by Jedi generals. Jedi generals were integrated into the Navy's command structure as well, working alongside admirals to command fleet groups. The Republic's new supreme commanders, Revan and Malak, had authority over all three branches, and they provided the Republic military with a level of centralized organization that it had never had before. Under Revan and Malak, the Republic military began a counteroffensive against the Mandalorians, and the tide of the Mandalorian Wars turned. Thanks to Revan's strategic genius, the confusion and lack of coordination that had defined the Republic's performance in the first half of the war evaporated, replaced with a rigid organization and carefully calculated strategy. For the next 2 years, this counteroffensive would drive the Mandalorians from world after world. This always came at a high cost, but this was something Revan could accept. He grew to match the Mandalorians for brutality, and his strategies could be as bloody as they were ingenious. Under Revan, the Republic won crucial battles at Altair III, Elam, and most importantly, Duxon. In the latter engagement, which lasted nearly a full year, the Republic Army suffered the highest casualties it had ever experienced, losing 10 soldiers for every Mandalorian that fell. But Revan's strategy allowed the Republic to come out on top in the end. After Duxon, both the Mandalorians and the Republic had been driven to the breaking point. The Neo-Crusaders had largely been defeated, but all the different branches of the Republic military had suffered staggering casualties as well. Both sides only had one battle left in them, and this climactic clash would take place above Malachor V. In that last, terrible battle, the Republic ultimately came out on top by unleashing the Mass Shadow Generator, a superweapon that destroyed the Mandalorian fleet. But the Republic's own casualties were enormous. The Republic fleet present for the battle, which represented a large portion of the surviving Republic Navy, was ravaged as well. But the battle was won, and the Mandalorian Wars were over. The Republic had survived, but another war was just over the horizon. The Republic didn't even have time to recover from the Mandalorian Wars before the Jedi Civil War began. The Mandalorian Wars had corrupted Revan, Malak, and their followers, turning them to the dark side, and just a few months after the Battle of Malachor V, they declared themselves a new generation of Sith. Darth Revan and Darth Malak established a new Sith Empire, and they set out to topple the Republic and conquer the galaxy. Worst of all, many in the Republic, especially among the military, supported the new Dark Lords, and many defected to join Revan's army. The Republic military was already in a bad state after the Mandalorian Wars. Its numbers had been ravaged, it was low on ships, and its supply lines were in tatters. But this problem was exacerbated greatly by the waves of defections that the Jedi Civil War began with. Vast numbers of ground soldiers became Sith troops, leaving the army critically understaffed, and defections from the Navy stripped the Republic of all its remaining large capital ships, handing all its Centurion battle cruisers and interdictors to the Sith. Many high-ranking military leaders defected, as did all of Revan's Jedi followers, leaving power vacuums in the Republic military's uppermost ranks. In the face of these issues, the Republic military had to adapt, and it had to do so fast. The Navy changed up its doctrine once again, shifting to relying entirely on small capital ships, which were all the Republic could afford to produce anyway. Hammerhead cruisers and 4A blockade runners became the new face of the Navy, and though they were dwarfed by the ships of the enemy, they actually fared much better than they had in the Mandalorian Wars, as they no longer needed to account for the sluggishness of large command ships. The Republic began deploying starfighters much more often to prop up the Navy, and this also played a major role in helping the fleet survive. On the ground, the Republic began to rely more and more on battle droids to support its outnumbered soldiers, and those soldiers received new equipment. Early in the Jedi Civil War, the Sith began deploying elite squads equipped with state-of-the-art energy shields, which could shrug off blaster fire for a time before their generators burned out. A small unit of shielded soldiers could take out a whole company of unshielded ones, but fortunately for the Republic, these shields weren't perfect. In particular, They were useless against vibroblades and other non-energy based melee weapons, and as a result, melee weapons became standard issue gear for Republic troops, greatly minimizing the threat of shielded Sith units. The Republic eventually reverse-engineered the Sith shields and began deploying its own shielded squads, which evened out the odds a little more. Despite all these improvements, and despite assistance and leadership from the Jedi Order, the Republic military was still utterly outmatched by the new Sith threat. In a matter of years, Revan's forces conquered a third of Republic space, and the Navy was pushed to the brink of collapse. The Republic military only managed to pull through thanks to Bastila Shen, a Jedi commander who was skilled in the art of battle meditation. Bastila helped the military eke out just enough victories to keep the Republic intact, and in one crucial battle, she even managed to capture Darth Revan. Darth Malak rose to take his master's place, and under him, the Sith offensive became more brutal than ever before, driving the Republic military even closer to total defeat. But the captured Revan was redeemed by the Jedi, and in the end, he and Bastila were able to help Admiral Dodonna of the Republic Navy pull off a decapitation strike against the Sith Armada in the Battle of Rakata Prime. This led to the sudden and complete implosion of the Sith Empire, which descended into its own vicious civil war in the absence of a strong leader. Against all odds, the Republic was given a stay of execution, but its victory in the Jedi Civil War came at an enormous cost. The Republic military remained weak for many years after the Jedi Civil War. It had suffered such extensive casualties that, in the years immediately following the war, it didn't have the strength to patrol more than the core regions of Republic territory. This, combined with other crises, some of which were made worse by the activities of Sith remnants, threatened to destroy the Republic completely. Fortunately, the Sith remnants were wiped out in 3951 BBY thanks to the efforts of the Jedi exile Mitra Surik, who also helped stabilize the Republic on a number of key fronts. Also vital to the Republic's recovery was Admiral Carth Onasi, an ally of Revan who helped keep the Republic military intact. Onasi and a Navy task force helped Mitra Surik defeat Darth Nihilus in the Battle of Telos IV, and he provided the sort of strong leadership that the military desperately needed. Largely thanks to Admiral Onasi, the Republic military slowly but surely began to recover. As it did, the military once more evolved, taking all the lessons it had learned during the past decades of war to heart. Even after recovering from the privation of the Jedi Civil War, the Republic Navy stuck to the doctrine of relying primarily on smaller cruisers and frigates, with a few medium cruisers mixed in for added flexibility. The Hammerhead-class cruiser, which had performed so well during the Jedi Civil War, stuck around, and it would remain in service for millennia. By the time Admiral Onasi's career came to an end, the Republic Navy had more or less returned to its former glory, now battle-hardened and with improved tactics. The Republic Army, meanwhile, was finally fully centralized. Ranks and orders of battle became standardized, and the army finally began to operate independently of the Navy. It continued to make extensive use of battle droids, and its soldiers were continually issued new equipment as technology advanced. New units of elite soldiers were created, and the army's upper ranks were clarified and restructured, creating a more robust chain of command. An increase in prestige, pay, and training in the army finally solved its long-running manpower shortage as well. Of the three branches, only the Republic Starfighter Corps saw no real change. It had performed well during the Jedi Civil War, and it continued to see use in more or less the same capacity for generations to come. In the end, the Republic military survived the crucible of the old Sith Wars, and it emerged even stronger for it. It would be tested yet again just a few centuries later when the Sith reared their heads once again, but for a time, it presided over a stable republic, one that was finally able to recover from the horrors it had been put through. For millennia, the Republic military was the largest and most powerful fighting force in the galaxy, defending the Republic from Sith, Mandalorians, and many other threats. But 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, after 14,000 years of preeminence, the Republic military was dissolved altogether as part of the Rusen Reformation, leaving the Republic without a full-sized standing armed force until the start of the Clone Wars. This major shift in Republic policy might seem strange given how important the Republic military had been in prior millennia, but in reality, it was only the end of a long period of decline. In the centuries following the end of the Old Sith Wars and the Republic's gradual recovery from them, the Republic military reached what could arguably be considered its apex. Even with the threat of the Sith seemingly vanquished, the Republic military continued to grow and improve upon its technology. Admiral Carthanasi, spurred on by Revan's warning that he needed to keep the Republic safe, ensured that the military remained vigilant, and by the time the Sith finally did rear their heads again, the Republic military was truly a force to be reckoned with. In keeping with its doctrine of relying primarily on smaller cruisers and frigates rather than large battleships, the Republic Navy of this period was dominated by the Hammerhead-class cruiser, which had become the predominant Republic warship during the Mandalorian Wars. It was supported by a variety of newer vessels. On the smaller side, the Thrunter-class corvette, a variant of the Hammerhead design, and the Defender-class light corvette took over for the old Foray-class blockade runners. On the larger side, the Navy made use of the Valor-class cruiser, a new class of heavy cruiser that entered service as command ships and heavy hitters, the cores of new Navy fleet groups. In the Starfighter Corps, the venerable Aurek-class tactical strike fighters were supplemented by new Liberator-class starfighters and PT-7 bombers. In both cases, Republic forces were well-rounded and spread out far across Republic territory, able to defend against hostile incursions at a moment's notice. The Republic Army, meanwhile, experienced a dramatic increase in quality following the Old Sith Wars. It finally went from being a motley collection of local defense forces to a singular unit, becoming fully integrated and professional. Army recruits were put through an 18-week-long basic training course followed by roughly a year of specialist training, which shaped them into skilled soldiers. For the first time, the Army also adopted a unified order of battle and rank structure. The basic Army rank of this period was Private, which designated the Army's basic rank-and-file soldiers. Above this were the ranks of Specialist, Corporal, and Sergeant, in that order, which commanded the lower order formations of the Republic Army. Above the rank of Sergeant was the rank of Ensign, followed by the ranks of Lieutenant, Captain, and Major. At the top of the hierarchy were the senior officers of the Republic Army, who had the ranks of Colonel, General, and Grand Marshal. Important officers were often designated as commanders, but this was a general honorific rather than a specific rank. The basic Republic Army unit was the Fire Team, a unit of 2 soldiers assigned to a common task. Soldiers more frequently operated as squads, however, which consisted of 6 to 10 soldiers or 3 to 5 fire teams. Above the squad level was the platoon, consisting of 50 to 100 soldiers, and the company, consisting of 150 to 250 soldiers. 750 to 1,500 soldiers made up a battalion, while 4,000 to 6,000 made up a regiment. Typically, the largest force that could be assigned to a single operation was a division, which represented 20 to 40,000 troops, but for especially large battles, multiple divisions would sometimes be grouped together to form a task group, the largest kind of unit in the Republic Army. The post-Old Sith Wars Republic Army was very well equipped and supported by robust supply lines, and since its pay and training had considerably improved since the old days, it had plenty of manpower as well. The typical Republic soldier was equipped with Duraplast armor, a blaster pistol, a blaster rifle with a built-in grenade launcher, several grenades, and 4 days of supplies, while Special Forces troopers had access to Durasteel and Cortosis armor, as well as personal shield generators and blaster cannons. The Republic Army of this period continued to make regular use of battle droids to support its organic infantry, and it also enjoyed the support of new divisions of elite soldiers. Notably, this included the Republic Troopers, the forebears of the later Republic Clone Troopers. Possibly inspired by the example of the Jedi Civil War era Sith Troopers, Republic troopers were elite soldiers equipped with full bodysuits of Duraplast armor, as opposed to the lighter armor and basic jumpsuits used by ordinary soldiers, as well as much heavier weapons than those issued to standard soldiers. Republic troopers were the best of the best, well-trained and well-equipped. The best of the Republic troopers were assigned to the Republic Special Forces Division, an elite unit that was assigned to the most critical missions. Special Forces troopers were able to go toe-to-toe with Sith warriors and come out on top during the Great Galactic War, and they worked well alongside the Jedi. All told, by the 3600s BBY, the Republic military was in a very strong position, and it would have been unimaginable that it could ever be dismantled. But this was the military zenith, and in 3681 BBY, it would begin a long road to ruin. It all began with the return of the Sith. In 3681 BBY, the true Sith Empire, which had been patiently waiting for its chance to strike for over 1,000 years, launched an all-out invasion of the remotest parts of Republic space. This was the beginning of the Great Galactic War, a 28-year-long bloodbath that brought the Republic to its knees. The Republic fought hard, but in spite of the strength of its forces, it still found itself unprepared for the sheer aggression of the enemy. The Sith had spent centuries preparing for war, and now that the time had finally come, they unleashed a millennium of built-up hatred against the Republic. Over the course of a decade, the Sith seized control over half of the Outer Rim, and they began campaigns deep into Republic territory. The military suffered terrible casualties, and though the Jedi came to the Republic's aid, they began taking losses too. But eventually, the military regained its footing. Beginning with a major Republic victory in the First Battle of Bothaway, Republic forces began to push back against Sith encroachments into the Mid-Rim and beyond. Other victories followed. The Republic drove off a Sith assault on Alderaan 14 years into the war, won a battle on Ord Radama, and with the help of a group of smugglers, they broke the Mandalorian blockade of the Hydian Way as well. But the Sith had their fair share of victories as well, and the war ground to a bloody stalemate, one that steadily wore down the Republic's military might. In the end, however, the Great Galactic War didn't end well for the Republic. In 3653 BBY, the Sith launched a surprise attack on Coruscant, devastating the Republic's capital and paralyzing both the Senate and the Jedi Order. In the wake of this disaster, the Republic signed the Treaty of Coruscant, which ended the Great Galactic War at the cost of ceding half the galaxy to the Sith. The Republic military did its best during the Great Galactic War, but it just wasn't enough. It walked away from the war having endured enormous casualties, and in the years that followed the Treaty of Coruscant, it would struggle to regain its lost strength. It would never fully be able to do so. For the next 12 years, the galaxy settled into the Cold War, which was marked by proxy wars and minor skirmishes between the Republic and the Sith. While most of the Republic military decided to cut its losses and attempt to rebuild, a number of military units mutinied and decided to continue the fight in defiance of the Treaty of Coruscant. One such group of rogue Republic army units was able to liberate Balmorra, while others kept fighting in the systems ceded to the Sith by the treaty. All the while, the Republic military prepared for the inevitable collapse of the peace, led by the War Trust, a group of 4 strategically gifted generals that played a major role in Republic tactics. The Cold War ultimately didn't last. The many branches of the peace led to a resumption of war in 3641 BBY, but this was a war the Republic military went into unprepared. Just prior to the resumption of hostilities, the Sith had assassinated every member of the War Trust, leaving the Republic without its greatest strategists. Consequently, the Republic military suffered significant losses once the war resumed, but thanks to the help of the Jedi, the Sith Empire soon had its own internal problems as well. Following the apparent death of the Sith Emperor, the Sith Empire became fraught with internal divisions, giving the Republic an advantage. But Emperor Vitiate wasn't truly dead, and behind the scenes, he'd been building up a new force with which to rule the galaxy. This was the Eternal Empire, a third great power that ruled from remote Sakul, and 6 years into the New Galactic War, it began campaigns against both the Republic and the Sith. With both sides already weak, the Eternal Empire quickly came out on top, and in 3635 BBY, the war came to an abrupt end. The Eternal Empire briefly became the de facto dominant power in the galaxy, but its reign didn't last. In 3631 BBY, coalition of Republic, Sith Imperial, and Mandalorian forces formed the Eternal Alliance, which brought down the Eternal Empire after a year of fighting. Once Zakul had been swept into the dustbin of history, the Republic and the Sith resumed fighting, and the Third Galactic War began. By this point, the Republic military had been severely weakened by years of heavy losses, including numerous senior personnel, but as the Third Galactic War went on, it steadily began to attain the upper hand. The Sith steadily began to turn against one another, and their own internal divisions provided the Republic with an opportunity, which it seized. As the years went on and wars began and ended, the Republic steadily drove back the Sith, reclaiming its former territory. By the late 3500s BBY, the true Sith Empire had ceased to exist, and though the Republic continued to fight wars with upstart Sith lords like Darth Desolus, the Sith steadily began to wane. By 3000 BBY, the Sith were all but extinct, and the Galactic Wars were over at last. Little is known about the end of the Galactic Wars and how the Republic military fared and evolved during it. The period that followed, from about 3500 BBY to 2000 BBY, was a time of rebuilding for the Republic, if a slow one that was marred by increasing institutional dysfunction in the Senate. The Republic military, like many other aspects of the Republic, recovered at a steady pace throughout this period, although it doesn't seem to have ever regained all the strength it had prior to the Great Galactic War. It didn't help that, in 3017 BBY, the brief but destructive 17th Alsacan conflict weakened it once again. Fortunately for the Republic, this would be the last of the Alsacan conflicts, but it was another factor that slowed the rebuilding of the Republic military. In the 2000s BBY, the Republic military was stretched thinner and thinner across the stars due to Republic expansion, steadily reducing its effectiveness. We don't know how it developed during this period, apart from the Navy's adoption of the 2-kilometer-long Invincible-class Dreadnought heavy cruiser as a new flagship class. However, either during this period or during the subsequent New Sith Wars, the Republic Army in particular went through some significant changes. Training and equipment standards began to decline a bit, and the Republic troopers ceased to exist, replaced by more ordinary soldiers and commando units. The Inter-Sith Wars period was a time of tentative peace for the Republic, but that peace ended in 2000 BBY. Around that time, the Jedi Master Phineas left the Jedi Order, fell to the dark side, and traveled across the Outer Rim, seeking out the remnants of the Sith. He learned the ways of the Sith from these disparate cults, united them under his banner, and then began a schism in the Jedi Order, luring many Jedi to the dark side. Phineas took the title of Darth Ruin, and he and his followers declared themselves the New Sith. Planning to rebuild the ancient Sith Empire, they began a war with the Republic, kicking off 1,000 years of misery for the galaxy. The New Sith Wars were different from any other conflict the Republic military had ever faced. Whereas previous Sith factions had been heavily centralized and usually fell apart once their leadership was taken out or destroyed itself, the same wasn't true of the New Sith. In fact, Darth Ruin died just a few years into his war, assassinated by his own apprentices. This caused the New Sith to fracture, but the different Sith splinter groups kept fighting, and so the war continued. This pattern would repeat for the next 1,000 years. The New Sith remained a fractured coalition of squabbling cults rather than an empire, and individually, the Sith cults were outmatched by the Republic and the Jedi. But for every Sith cult the Republic crushed, another took its place, and as the war went on, the New Sith began to subject the Republic to death by 1,000 cuts. Throughout the New Sith Wars, the Republic military fought hard against these scattered Sith factions, often under the leadership of the Jedi. But due to the nature of the new Sith threat, the Republic military had a real tough time making any progress. It was simultaneously too centralized and spread too thin across Republic space to deal with the multitude of different enemy factions with different strategies and agendas that it was up against, especially given that the new Sith acted more as insurgents than as conquerors. The Sith ultimately had a pretty easy time dividing and conquering the Republic military, taking full advantage of its overextension to steadily wear down its strength. All the while, the pressures of the new Sith War, combined with the existing institutional dysfunction of the Senate, caused the Republic to steadily implode. The Senate became paralyzed and completely ineffective, leaving the military and many other bureaucracies mismanaged and underfunded. Supply lines withered and equipment and training standards began to slip across the Republic military. Technologically, the military stagnated, and eventually it even began to slide backwards due to supply line issues. Even by the end of the New Sith Wars, the Republic still relied heavily on hammerhead cruisers and Aurek fighters 3,000 years after their introduction, which was, in equal parts, a sign of how great those designs were and a sign of how dire the situation had become for the Republic. For the first 500 years of the New Sith Wars, the Republic military managed to more or less hold together despite these struggles, keeping the new Sith confined to the Rim for the most part. But that all changed in 1466 BBY when the Republic suffered one of the bloodiest defeats in its entire history, the Battle of Mizra. That massacre of a battle saw a joint Jedi-Republic force get utterly trounced by the Sith, who slaughtered or captured hundreds of Jedi and 500,000 Republic army soldiers. Following the Battle of Mizra, the Republic lost control of pretty much the entire Rim, and both the government and the military began to fall apart. In the centuries that followed, the Republic government only held together after the Senate yielded virtually all its power to the Supreme Chancellor, a position that became near exclusively held by the Jedi, while the Republic military began to experience a steady collapse. It suffered staggering casualties in campaign after campaign, losing vast amounts of ships, fighters, soldiers, and supplies with each passing decade. Standards fell until the Republic Army became little better than a poorly trained police force with heavy weapons, while the Navy and Starfighter Corps were forced to rely on outdated craft. The Jedi took over the military's leadership, and the Republic military's theater of operations steadily shrunk, leaving most of the galaxy undefended. For protection, all those sectors abandoned by the Republic military had available were the Jedi Lords, errant Jedi who settled on planets in need and became quasi-feudal sovereigns, raising armies of local forces for defense against the marauding Sith. All of this culminated in the Republic Dark Age, also known by some as the Fall of the Old Republic. This was the final century of the New Sith Wars, lasting from 1100 to 1000 BBY, and it saw the Republic all but cease to exist across most of the galaxy. The Republic military was forced to withdraw from all regions outside of the core worlds, colonies, and along some of the major hyperspace routes, and HoloNet service, as well as most trade, was discontinued beyond these regions, cutting most of the abandoned sectors off from galactic civilization. The Jedi held the Republic and its military together within what little territory it had left, but most of the galaxy only had the Jedi Lords for protection. The only things that kept the Sith from conquering the galaxy during this period were constant infighting and the shutdown of the HoloNet, which significantly hamstrung Sith expansion efforts. As a consequence, most of the galaxy fell beyond the control of either power, and these regions descended into anarchy. Both in the unaligned sectors and in Sith space, civilization as the galaxy knew it began to come apart. Many of the Sith territories developed primitive economies based entirely on slave labor, and technological standards plummeted. Throughout the Dark Age, the Republic military struggled to regain its footing, but by that point, there wasn't much it could do. The Navy, Army, and Starfighter Corps alike were in tatters, and the Jedi Council kept most of what was left with them to defend the remnants of Republic territory. Occasionally, Jedi-led Republic strike forces or smaller Jedi strike teams struck out from Republic space to crush a Sith kingdom or two, but in 100 years they gained very little ground. It would ultimately take a new force entirely to stop the rising tide of the Sith, and this force was ultimately raised by the Jedi Lords. While the Jedi Council and what remained of the Republic military held the Republic together, the Jedi Lords had been doing what they could to protect the fringe. Together with their students, armies of local allies and subjects, and a scattering of knights errant, the Jedi Lords spent the Republic Dark Age leading the fight against the Sith and their allies. Despite this, the Jedi Council and the Jedi Lords didn't get along too well. The Lords and their followers were fast and loose with Jedi doctrine, having families and running petty states out on the rim, which the Council didn't really care for, while the Lords saw the Council as dogmatic and unwilling to do what needed to be done. This rivalry never got too heated, and the two groups worked together to protect the people of the galaxy, but the rivalry did ultimately kickstart the final chapter of the new Sith Wars. It began with the rise of a Jedi Lord named Rolan, who became much better known as the Knight of Hoth, and eventually just Lord Hoth, after winning a major victory on that planet. Hoth was a grim but fearless man with a gift for tactics and warfare, and many a young Jedi admired him greatly. But the Jedi Council really didn't care for Hoth due to his Jedi Lord status and his willingness to occasionally make use of morally questionable tactics, and they especially didn't want their students romanticizing him. To combat Hoth's fame, the Council decided to create their own champion, selecting Jedi Master Skir Khan to lead a new campaign against the Sith. But this ended in complete disaster. Khan fell to the dark side, defected to the Sith, and to make matters worse, he ended up reforming the new Sith into the Brotherhood of Darkness, a unified and much stronger Sith coalition. By 1010 BBY, Khan had united all of the scattered Sith kingdoms under the banner of the Brotherhood, vowing to lead them to victory against the Republic and the Jedi. But Khan's Brotherhood of Darkness was opposed by another new force. Even as the Brotherhood united the Sith under its banner, Lord Hoth began assembling a coalition of his own. He left Coruscant with a large following of Jedi Knights and began seeking out each of the Jedi Lords, calling upon them to unite their forces against the Brotherhood. The Jedi Lords answered Hoth's call, and they pooled their private armies into a single military coalition. An army of light to cast down the Brotherhood of Darkness. Hoth's army soon took to the field against the Brotherhood, and the last of the new Sith Wars, the War of Light and Darkness, began. The Army of Light was initially a non-Republic institution, although it fought on the Republic's behalf. It answered to the Jedi Grand Council, which was made up of the most prominent Jedi Lords, with Lord Hoth as the Council's leader, the Seneschal of the Army of Light. This council commanded an eclectic coalition of forces drawn from all over the galaxy. The Army of Light was led by Jedi, from the Jedi Lords to the many knights and Padawans loyal to them, while the majority of its forces consisted of the armies the Jedi Lords had raised back in their home sectors. These were joined by personnel from the Republic military that were tired of its ineffectiveness, including entire Republic Navy fleet groups and Republic Army battalions. The bulk of the Army of Light was divided into the 7 Legions of Light, each led by one of the most powerful Jedi Lords. The Army of Light was much less a professional force than the Republic military had been, with training standards and even technological standards varying wildly across the army. Some Jedi Lords' levies were armed with blasters and vibroblades, while others carried spears, bows, swords, and clubs due to the breakdown of trade, industrial production, and technological development in their parts of space. Generally, advanced modern weaponry was made available to all when it could be, but in several theaters of the war, the state of the Army of Light's supply lines and the collapse of local civilization meant that bows, spears, and pikes became the norm, with the few available blasters reserved for elite units. Lucky soldiers would be given shields or weapons made of cortosis or beskar in preparation for close quarters combat with Sith, but these weren't always available. The ordinary, non-force sensitive soldiers of the Army of Light came from a wide variety of backgrounds. Some were highly trained, while others were essentially just conscripts that had been given a weapon and then rushed to the front. Discipline varied considerably. While the former Republic army units within the Army of Light maintained professional standards and organization, the warriors, levies, and conscripts that made up most of the army were often disorganized, acting more as an armed mob than an army at times. Although the Jedi kept the behavior of their followers in check, the Army of Light remained a thoroughly unconventional force. With that said, the Army of Light did have one big strength. Its soldiers were fiercely loyal and devoted to their cause. Some were loyal principally to their Jedi lords who had kept them and their families safe, while others were devoted to the fight to save the galaxy from the Sith, but almost all had spirit. The Army of Light's standard infantry was typically supported by robust units of swoop-bike cavalry, usually led into the fray by Jedi bikers. These speeder units acted as the Army of Light's principal air support as well, and they were quite effective, equipped with a variety of swoop models built for speed and firepower. But the most important component of the Army of Light's ground forces were the Jedi. Thousands of Jedi from all over the galaxy joined the Army of Light, becoming commanders and elite warriors. The greatest of these, of course, were the Jedi Lords, as well as their handful of non-Jedi Masters that joined the army. However, most Jedi in the Army of Light were Jedi Knights, most of whom were either trained by the Jedi Lords or recruited from Coruscant by Lord Hoth. A few Knights Errant assisted the army on a conditional basis, and many Jedi Padawans and even some initiates served in the Army of Light as well. These Jedi suffered staggering casualties on the battlefield, and to overcome this, the Army of Light took to recruiting Force sensitives from across the Rim to join their cause. The collapse of Republic authority meant that Jedi recruitment had been lacking for some time, leaving many Force sensitives undiscovered by the Jedi. The Army of Light gathered up as many of them as they could, even forcibly conscripting them in some cases to prevent the Sith from doing the same. When the war got especially bleak, the Army of Light began recruiting Force-sensitive children, fast-tracking their training and sending them to the battlefield, which was something Lord Hoth was never entirely comfortable with. These extreme recruiting tactics did succeed at keeping the Army of Light supplied with Jedi reinforcements, however, which proved vital to the war effort. The core of the Army of Light was its ground forces, but Hoth also assembled a makeshift navy and starfighter corps to support it. The Space Force was also ad hoc and fairly disorganized. Since many Jedi Lords initially didn't have Space Forces, Lord Hoth had to supplement their existing fleets of warships, gunboats, and starfighters with hastily converted freighters and passenger liners. Defectors from the Republic Navy and Starfighter Corps granted the Army of Light a small professional space force to build their fleets around, but most of the Army of Light's navy was still composed of small gunships and corvettes. For 10 years, the Army of Light battled the Brotherhood of Darkness all across the galaxy. The Army of Light was severely outnumbered most of the time, and it suffered from chronic supply shortages, but Jedi leadership and Lord Hoth's tactical brilliance allowed it to win quite a few early victories. Hoth pulled this off by focusing on attacking the Brotherhood's flanks, circumventing the Sith's main forces to attack their strongholds directly. This was surprisingly effective, and it played a critical role in cutting the Brotherhood down to size early in the war. The Brotherhood quickly recovered and launched a counter-offensive, but Hoth counteracted this by convincing the Senate to make the Army of Light an official component of the Republic military. The Supreme Chancellor named Hoth the Republic military's new Supreme Commander, and Hoth used his role to requisition much of the Republic Army and Republic Navy to support the Army of Light's campaigns. Following this development, the war became a bloody stalemate. Vast armies and fleets loyal to the Jedi and the Sith tore into each other across the galaxy with no end in sight. Both sides suffered massive casualty rates and were constantly running out of supplies. It seemed like the Army of Light and the Brotherhood of Darkness were going to fight until they destroyed each other, the Republic, and most of what remained of galactic civilization. Hoping to avoid this, Hoth changed his strategy once again, this time attempting the complete opposite of what he had done in the army's first campaign, to draw the Brotherhood's main forces into a direct confrontation. Hoth hoped that this would allow the Army of Light to wipe out the Sith Lords that led the Brotherhood, which Hoth hoped would cause what remained of the Sith to fall apart. To that end, the Army of Light decided to make a stand on the Sith-held planet Ruusan, an unremarkable mid-rim world that had been a minor Republic staging ground before the Sith captured it. The Republic had launched a feeble counterattack, but the Sith easily repulsed it, and Ruusan had remained in their hands. Hoping to draw the Brotherhood into a final battle, Lord Hoth led the main force of the Army of Light to Ruusan and routed the Sith present there. The Brotherhood, caught off guard by this overkill attack, took the bait, and Lord Khan personally led the core of the Sith's forces to the planet. In battle after battle, the Ruusan campaign steadily escalated. By the time of the 6th battle, almost the entirety of both armies was encamped on the planet. As Hoth had hoped, Lord Khan summoned every last Sith Lord in the galaxy to Ruusan after the 6th battle, trusting his vassal armies to handle the war's other fronts. Hoth, similarly, called in every ally he could, hoping to crush the Sith once and for all. Despite enormous casualties, supply issues, and the complete unavailability of blaster ammunition, the Army of Light ultimately prevailed on Ruusan, thanks primarily to Lord Hoth's guerrilla tactics, and Lord Farfalla coming in clutch with reinforcements at the height of the 7th battle. Following the Jedi victory in the 7th Battle of Ruusan, most of the Sith had been slain, and the Brotherhood's armies were in tatters. Lord Khan and the rest of the surviving Sith Lords ultimately killed themselves in a last act of defiance, taking Lord Hoth and 100 Jedi with them, and with their deaths, the Sith, as far as the galaxy knew, were extinct. What was left of the Brotherhood of Darkness promptly ceased to exist, and by the time the dust settled on Ruusan, the new Sith Wars were over, and, against all odds, the Republic had won. The Republic that emerged from the new Sith Wars had fallen to its lowest point yet. The galaxy was in shambles, central control was lacking, and the Jedi were all that was propping the Republic up. But with the Sith finally gone, the galaxy could breathe again, and there was an opportunity for someone to come along and pick up the pieces. That someone ended up being Tarsus Valorum. After the 7th Battle of Ruusan, what was left of the Galactic Senate elected Valorum as Supreme Chancellor, making him the first non-Jedi Chancellor in over 400 years. Valorum boldly sought not only to rebuild the Republic, but to make it better than ever before. To that end, he proposed the Ruusan Reformations, a series of sweeping reforms that overhauled many aspects of the Republic and the Jedi Order. The Reformations overhauled Senate representation and how sector boundaries were drawn, transferred vast amounts of power from the Supreme Chancellor's office back to the Senate, and completely restructured Republic bureaucracy, making the Republic a dramatically more efficient government. The Jedi Order relinquished its control over all Republic institutions, demilitarized, and abolished the Jedi Lordships. These institutional changes had an enormous impact, allowing the Republic's economy and infrastructure to rapidly recover. The sectors that the Republic had lost control of flocked back to Republic governance, and galactic civilization began to put itself back together at breakneck speed. For the first time in ages, the Republic was a functional government, and within just a few decades of the Ruusan Reformations, it had entered a new, unprecedented golden age. But while the Ruusan Reformations were a major boost for the Republic as a whole, they were a different story for the Republic military. The Army of Light was made to disband as part of the demilitarization of the Jedi Order, and the Republic military as a whole ultimately met with a similar fate. By this point in galactic history, the Republic military had all but ceased to exist anyway. The military-industrial complex that had once supported it had withered, vast numbers of its personnel were dead, and it was disorganized and in a reduced state. Valorum could have made rebuilding the Republic military a priority of his chancellorship, but instead he decided to try a new approach. As we mentioned earlier, even before the Republic military started falling apart, it had been overextended, and its centralization did it no favors in dealing with the new Sith. That sort of centralization was something Valorum was out to reduce anyway. The goal of the Ruusan Reformations was to make the Republic less centralized, more democratic, and more collaborative. To that end, the Ruusan Reformations completely dissolved the Republic military, replacing it with two much different institutions: the Planetary Security Forces, which were sector-based and locally controlled, and the Judicial Forces, a small, federal-level rapid response unit. The idea was fairly simple. The PSFs would be locally managed and maintained according to the wishes of their home sector's people, and they would be responsible for most local defense duties. If a crisis beyond a PSF's ability to handle cropped up, the Senate would dispatch the judicial forces to deal with it instead. The judicials could requisition reinforcements from PSFs as needed, and governor generals could be appointed to coordinate judicial operations with local governments. When there was no active crisis, however, the judicials maintained only a few small task forces and acted mostly as police. Most of the surviving personnel and assets of the Republic Army, Republic Navy, and Republic Starfighter Corps were primarily handed out to the planetary security forces, especially to the more remote sectors that couldn't afford to build their own fleets. The remainder became the new judicial forces. The suppliers that had previously served the Republic Navy switched to serving the judicials and PSFs, as did the academics and war colleges the Republic had previously maintained. Within just a few short years, the Republic military was no more. Following the end of the New Sith Wars, the Ruusan Reformations officially dissolved the Republic military, replacing it with a more decentralized system that emphasized local forces instead of a large, centrally controlled military. For centuries, this system worked well, but cracks eventually started to show in it, and some in the Republic began to call for its replacement. These militarists got their wish with the creation of the Grand Army of the Republic, the final evolutionary stage of the Republic military. For defense in the post-Ruusan era, the Republic primarily relied on the Planetary Security Forces, or PSFs. The PSFs were actually a pretty old institution. They had originally been created 15,000 years before the Battle of Yavin to provide extra defense for outlying sectors threatened by Hutt activity. For most of history though, they were mostly just Republic Navy auxiliaries, and following the Ruusan Reformations, they swelled in size and became much more important. The old academies of the Republic military were converted for the use of PSFs from across the galaxy, with the College of Planetary Security Forces on Anaxis being the most prestigious. The PSFs were controlled by their sector governments, albeit with Republic oversight, and they were thus designed according to local standards. Each one was unique, with its own traditions, ranks, training standards, and equipment. As a result of these different standards, as well as different levels of funding, the quality of PSFs could vary wildly. Some were renowned for their high standards and effectiveness. Among these, the Ascena Rangers, the Lantillian Planetary Security Force, the Garde d'Azur, the Herte Home Brigade, and the Greater Pleuroid Warriors. Others were critically underfunded and rife with corruption, rendering them completely ineffective. Wealth played a major role in this. While wealthy sectors in the core could supply their PSFs with state-of-the-art ships and equipment, those on the rim could usually only afford to maintain what ships they had. Originally, these poorer sectors benefited from inheriting old Republic Navy assets, but as the years dragged on, these became hopelessly obsolete, and the rim PSFs just couldn't afford to replace them. In the hopes of keeping the peace, the Ruusan Reformations also placed a number of restrictions on the size and capabilities of PSF assets. Capital ships that were more than 600 meters long were restricted to slow-as-hell Class 5 hyperdrives and generally forbidden from leaving their home sectors, and there were also strict limits on how much firepower these capital ships could have. PSFs were also limited in the size of their fleets, although these limits could be relaxed or waived for frontier sectors, in theory. In practice, it was actually the wealthy sectors in the core that got around these regulations, mainly by using legal loopholes that allowed military shipyards to possess fleets of their own for demonstration purposes. These shipyards could make lend-lease deals with sectors that could afford them, and many core sectors abused this to greatly increase the size of the fleets under their control without actually incorporating them into the PSFs. Fleets assembled in this way, known as demonstration fleets, weren't regulated by the Ruusan Reformations, so sector governments could use them to legally establish fleets well beyond the official limits. Since the wealthy sectors that amassed these demonstration fleets of barely legal battleships did so mostly as vanity projects, this loophole was never dealt with. Then there were the Judicial Forces, a branch of the Judicial Department which answered to the Galactic Senate. The Judicial Forces were what was left of the centralized Republic military. They were a small, professional military force, albeit one geared more for peacekeeping than for war, and they were meant to operate alongside the Jedi Order in intervening in situations the PSFs couldn't handle. The Judicial Forces consisted of a small force of skilled soldiers trained at the Judicial Academy on Coruscant, distinguishable by their navy blue uniforms, which earned judicial personnel the nickname Bluecoats. They maintained a small but top-of-the-line fleet, primarily consisting of smaller cruisers, frigates, and corvettes, which was usually tasked with rapid response actions. In the early centuries of the Republic Golden Age, the Judicial Forces played a crucial role in reunifying the galaxy, putting out fires and bringing an end to local wars. Initially, the Judicial Forces were a prestigious institution, inheriting the glory and traditions of the old Republic military, but they began to decline as the Great Peace of the Republic wore on. The Judicial Forces were repeatedly rocked by corruption scandals over the centuries, and attempts to revitalize them met with disaster. In one infamous instance, the Senate commissioned a fleet of 200 Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers, the Katana fleet for the Judicial Forces Navy, only for the entire fleet to be lost without a trace after the crews succumbed to a hive virus. The whole Judicial Forces PSF system is sometimes construed as a misstep by some fans and by in-universe militarists, but for the first few centuries after Ruusan, it worked incredibly well. It came as a relief to a war-weary galaxy, and it convinced many systems in the Outer Rim that had grown skeptical of the Republic's motives that it really was changing things for the better. Contributed greatly to the stability of the Republic Golden Age, and initially, the new system was sufficient to defend the Republic against threats. Many in the Republic believed that the dissolution of the Republic military was a positive change, and with the hindsight of how the reformation of the Republic military went, they were probably right. But as we've already discussed, the post-Ruusan system wasn't perfect. As PSFs in the Rim began to decline in quality due to the poverty of their home sectors, an epidemic of piracy began in the Outer Rim. This, combined with steadily mounting crises brought into being by the Sith, steadily began to erode faith in the new system, and some began calling for the Republic military's return. The leader of this militarist faction was the senator from the Seswena sector, a man named Ranulph Tarkin. A wealthy oligarch of Eriadu's Tarkin family, Ranulph Tarkin had incredible political power, which he primarily used to push the militarist cause. He had served as an officer in his sector's PSF, the Seswena Defense Forces, and during his service, he had led several successful campaigns against the pirates that plagued the outer reaches of the sector. This led him to believe that military force was the only solution to the scourge of piracy and the breakdown of so-called law and order in the Outer Rim, and Tarkin was quite belligerent in his devotion to pushing this message. When it became that his position was well in the minority, Ranulph Tarkin sought to put the militarist program into action himself. Tarkin began his militarist crusade by leaving the SDF and becoming an executive at Quintard Orbital Manufacturing, a Tarkin family-owned shipbuilding firm. He used this position to turn QOM into a military shipbuilder, and he convinced the Republic's other military shipbuilders to start operating out of QOM's shipyards. Once QOM had been reconfigured to his liking, Tarkin handed it off to a cousin and talked the Seswena sector's senator into appointing him the sector's governor general, which put him in charge of the Seswena Defense Forces. By 57 BBY, everything was in order, and Governor General Tarkin set about the remilitarization of the Seswena sector. As Governor General, Tarkin commissioned a fleet of new, state-of-the-art military warships from QOM and its new partners. The Judicials, however, weren't too happy about this. Tarkin's new fleet exceeded several of the caps the Ruusan reformations placed on the PSFs, and so the Judicials shut down Tarkin's pet project, to the Governor General's fury. But it would take a lot more than that to end Tarkin's crusade. For his plan B, he turned to the same Lend-Lease loophole that the core worlds used for their navies, amassing enormous demonstration fleets under the de facto control of the SDF. Tarkin then began striking mutual defense pacts with neighboring sectors left and right, leveraging the wealth of the Sessuena sector to gain influence over the largely poor sectors that made up the western reaches. In exchange for a substantial economic boost from the Sessuena sector, these neighboring sectors combined their planetary security forces with the SDF under the banner of the Outland Region's security forces, which was under the ultimate command of Governor General Tarkin. The ORSF member PSFs would share ships, personnel, and navigational data, and they would treat their combined territory as a single theater of operations, an oversector. By this point, Tarkin's crusade had evolved in scope. He didn't just want to remilitarize the Republic anymore, he had become convinced that the Republic needed to do away with the Ruusan reformations entirely and re-establish its central military. As he himself openly claimed, he wasn't just building up the Outlands region's security force as a local unit, he wanted it to be the foundation on which a new Republic military would be built, an example for the Senate to follow. Tarkin even instructed ORSF personnel to refer to themselves as soldiers in the Republic Navy or the Republic Army. This made the project even more troubling to Tarkin's opponents, especially given how Tarkin had essentially bought the cooperation of neighboring sectors for the project, and the fact that the ORSF exclusively recruited human personnel. The militarist faction as a whole was rife with speciesism, and the imperialist approach Tarkin had taken in establishing the ORSF's oversector, which he referred to as the Greater Sessuena, was an unfortunate harbinger of what was to come. In 54 BBY, Ranulph Tarkin handed command of the ORSF off to another of his cousins, while he went to Coruscant to push militarist positions as the Sessuena sector senator. As senator, Tarkin waged a highly publicized legal battle with the judicial forces over their enforcement of the Ruusan Reformation, all while calling for remilitarization at every possible opportunity. For about a decade, his arguments largely fell on deaf ears, but things started to change after the Stark Hyperspace War. This brief but highly consequential conflict took place in 44 BBY, and it saw the Stark Commercial Combine, a coalition of pirates and unscrupulous corporate actors, attempt to seize economic control of the Republic via cyber warfare and armed force. The Senate attempted to resolve the situation peacefully with a summit on Troikan, but Ranulph Tarkin messed that up by gatecrashing the summit with the full force of the ORSF, intent on wiping out the Stark Combine once and for all. Most of Tarkin's ships were destroyed by the Combine's computer viruses, however, and what was left of the ORSF suffered brutal casualties in the brief war that followed. The Republic ultimately came out on top in the war thanks to Jedi leadership, Trade Federation reinforcements, and Tarkin's men, but the Stark Hyperspace War nonetheless gave the militarists their wedge issue. Ranulph Tarkin, the militarist faction's leader, died in the war, but if anything, this only made his cause stronger. The militarists held him up as a hero, and they used his memory to keep pushing for remilitarization. In the years that followed, crises continued to mount in the Republic, culminating in the Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY. With each crisis, the militarists grew stronger, and after the start of the Separatist crisis in 24 BBY, they began a serious push for Republic remilitarization, leading to what eventually became the Military Creation Act of 22 BBY. Unbeknownst to the militarists, however, a new Republic military was already well on its way by that point, and the final chapter of Republic history was about to begin. In 32 BBY, the Jedi Master Cypher Dyas, spurred on by premonitions of an army of darkness sweeping across the galaxy, traveled to the remote planet of Kamino on a tip from the IGBC executive Hego Damask. There, Cypher Dyas, acting on behalf of the Jedi, placed an order for an enormous army of clones to be created for the Republic's use, and the Kaminoans immediately set to work on the project. Unbeknownst to Cypher Dyas, he had just ordered the creation of the very army of darkness he had foreseen, for Hego Damask was actually the Sith Lord, Darth Plagueis, who had convinced Sifo-Dyas to lay the groundwork for the final stage of the Sith's plan to conquer the galaxy. Shortly after Sifo-Dyas' initial visit to Kamino, he was killed by his old friend, the ex-Jedi Master Dooku. Dooku, under the guise of Lord Tyrannus, took over the project, recruiting Jango Fett to be the Kaminoans' prime clone, while Darth Sidious, in his day-to-day guise as Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, funneled funding to the project from the Republic budget. The Kaminoans weren't privy to any of these manipulations, of course. As far as they knew, the project was sanctioned, and they didn't care to investigate, knowing that the army had to be created in the strictest secrecy anyway. Instead, they set to work rebuilding the Republic military from the ground up. The creation of this new military was a very deliberate and thoroughly interconnected process. There were none of the long periods of evolution that earlier stages of the Republic military had undergone. The Kaminoans planned out everything from equipment and training to unit organization and fleet composition, designing it all to work together according to a single, cohesive battle plan. They created and trained all of the army's personnel with the assistance of Jango Fett and a group of mercenaries he recruited to train commandos, and they made secret contracts with Rathana Heavy Engineering, Blastech Industries, and others to design starships, vehicles, and weaponry for the new force. The result was a fully formed military that seemed to appear out of nowhere on the eve of the Clone Wars, which even came pre-equipped with its own standard tactics. In 22 BBY, after the Senate learned that the Separatists were amassing an enormous droid army on Geonosis, the Military Creation Act was passed, and Supreme Chancellor Palpatine declared that the Republic military was to be rebuilt. No sooner had this announcement been made than the Grand Army of the Republic descended on Geonosis under the command of the Jedi. Just like that, the Clone Wars had begun, and the Republic military was back. The Republic spent the first half of the Clone Wars remilitarizing, but this process was made much easier by the Kaminoans, who had delivered a full-fledged military that just needed leadership. While the Kaminoans had primarily been contracted to assemble a ground force, the new Grand Army of the Republic, they also laid the groundwork for a rebuilt Republic Navy and Republic Starfighter Corps, assembling a basic fleet of capital ships and training squadrons of clone pilots. The Kaminoans also delivered a fourth military branch, the Republic Special Operations Brigade, which consisted of elite commando units. All the Republic had to do was fill the new military's upper leadership roles and rebuild its military-industrial complex to support the new force. The first of these tasks was easy. The GAR was designed to be led by the Jedi after all, and the Jedi had already taken command of the army during the Battle of Geonosis. A month into the war, Palpatine made Jedi Command official by drafting all members of the Jedi Order to serve as GAR officers via executive order. Additional leadership roles, especially in the Navy, were handed out to high-ranking officers from the judicial forces and planetary security forces. Supporting the new military wasn't all that much harder, although it did take longer. The Republic's old military academies were all still around to service the judicial forces and PSFs after all, and they had an easy time switching gears to training new Republic military officers. The Republic still had plenty of weapons manufacturers and military shipbuilders that were all too eager to take on massive government contracts. It took a while for the Republic to commit the full weight of its industrial might to the war effort and to establish robust supply lines and support networks, but these obstacles still weren't insurmountable. Alongside the Republic's new clone army, it also made use of its existing forces, the Judicials and PSFs, during the Clone Wars. After the Battle of Geonosis, the Judicial forces were assimilated back into the Republic military. The small Judicial fleet became part of the Navy, while the Judicial's ground units were reorganized into the Grand Army of the Republic. Many Judicial personnel were promoted to officer ranks and put in command of clone units to fill out the military's upper ranks. The PSFs, meanwhile, initially remained independent, left under the command of their sector governments. This presented problems for the Republic, as the PSFs of separatist sectors usually followed the lead of their parent governments and sided with the Confederacy, and in some sectors, PSFs split into factions, fighting small civil wars of their own. Those PSFs that remained loyalist, however, played a vital role in the Clone Wars. Though the Clone Wars are often thought of as a clash between the Republic's clone army and the Confederacy's droid army, this wasn't always the case. To quote the Essential Guide to Warfare, many of the battles of the Clone Wars were fought between armies of organics with barely a battle droid or clone trooper in sight. In some divided sectors, battles were fought by soldiers on both sides wearing identical uniforms, and opposing fleets were made up of the same classes of warships and starfighters with only new insignia and hastily applied coats of paint indicating the change of allegiance. In fact, the Clone Wars might best be described as a vast collection of local wars fought primarily by the PSFs, which the centralized armies of both sides intervened in on crucial fronts. With all that said, loyalist PSFs didn't get to remain fully independent. Personnel from the PSFs, especially officers, were regularly drafted for roles in the main Republic military, which also borrowed fleets and other assets from the PSFs from time to time. This pattern of control grew until after the Battle of Rendili, midway through the war, when the Senate voted to just nationalize the PSFs and be done with it. The PSFs weren't entirely merged into the Republic military, but most of their important assets were, and those PSFs that were left partially independent were still shadows of their former selves, essentially reserve units for the main military to draw upon. Speaking of, let's talk about the new Republic military, starting with the GAR itself. The Grand Army of the Republic was the spiritual successor to the Republic Army, but in practice, it was a vastly different institution. It was mostly composed of Kaminoan-grown clone troopers, for one thing, although it did have a number of units composed of soldiers that had either assimilated from the Judicial Forces or PSFs, or recruited during the war, and clone units were often led by recruited officers. These clones brought an entirely new ethos and set of traditions to the Republic military, many of them based on Mandalorian traditions handed down to them by Jango Fett, and they followed an entirely new command structure and order of battle. The lowest rank in the GAR was that of Trooper, or Private for recruited soldiers. Above this were the ranks of Corporal, Sergeant, and Sergeant Major, which held leadership roles within squads, the GAR's smallest organizational unit. Each squad consisted of 9 clone troopers led by a sergeant or sergeant major, with one of the 9 troopers being a corporal and the squad's second in command. The next level up was the platoon, consisting of 36 clone troopers plus officers in 4 squads. Platoons were commanded by lieutenants who came in second class and first class grades. Above the rank of lieutenant were the ranks of captain and major, both of which commanded companies of 144 clone troopers in 4 platoons. This pattern continued through to the higher levels of organization. 4 companies, or 576 clone troopers, made up a battalion. 4 battalions, or 2,304 troopers, made up a regiment. 4 regiments, or 9,216 troopers, made up a brigade or legion, and 4 of those made up a corps, with a total of 36,864 clone troopers plus officers. All of these units were commanded by commanders, a rank that came in 4 different levels: the ranks of battalion commander, regimental commander, senior commander, and marshal commander. The latter rank was the highest that any clone could achieve, although recruited soldiers could reach higher ranks exclusive to them, such as colonel and brigadier general. The higher commander ranks typically worked alongside Jedi officers, although Jedi could also attach themselves to smaller units as they saw fit. Jedi were given different ranks depending on their rank within the Jedi Order. Padawans became Jedi commanders, while knights and masters became Jedi generals, and the most esteemed masters became senior generals or high generals. Jedi commanders were usually attached to regiments, while standard Jedi generals commanded brigades or corps. The higher Jedi general ranks commanded the GAR's highest organizational levels, the sector armies and the systems armies. There were 20 sector armies, each under the command of a Jedi senior general, each of which was assigned to a specific theater of the galaxy. These originally each consisted of 4 corps, or 147,456 troopers in total. 2 sector armies made up a systems army, which originally contained 294,912 troopers and which was commanded by a Jedi High General, the rank assigned to the members of the Jedi Council. Originally, when the sector armies contained just 4 corps each, these were divided up according to the 1-4-16-64 plan. This plan was conceived as a simple but efficient way to maintain control of an oversector by dividing up the sector army's corps into progressively smaller operational units. One corps would remain intact as a reserve assault division, deployed in full to capture hard targets, usually amounting to an entire star system. Another would operate as 4 brigades, which could take control of most important systems, while a third would split into 16 regiments for standard planetary engagements. The fourth would operate as 64 battalions, which would act as rapid response strike units, which could capture a mined colony or an urban district. When necessary, companies, platoons, or squads could be detached from any of these units when a mission required it. In practice, however, this plan quickly fell apart, and even before the number of corps in a sector army expanded, the sector armies had settled on keeping one corps intact and breaking up the others into a few dozen battalions and hundreds of fast-moving raiding companies. On top of this efficient command structure, the Grand Army of the Republic came with all sorts of cool toys, from personal equipment to vehicles. The exceptional skill and training of the Republic's clone troopers, which was on par with elite soldiers, was matched by exceptional equipment, including full-body plastoid armor suits and an arsenal of high-powered blasters. Recruited soldiers were generally afforded less protection and tended to be less skilled, but they had access to the same weapons at least. These infantry were supported by a vast array of assault vehicles, from speeder bikes to repulsor lift tanks to walkers. In the first months of the war, the GAR primarily relied on SPHAT artillery, the 74Z speeder bike, the BARC speeder, and 3 classes of walker, the ATRT, ATXT, and ATTE. For air support, the GAR received extensive assistance from LAAT gunships. This vehicle arsenal swelled in size as the war went on, bolstered by the addition of new crafts, large and small, from the ISP Swamp Speeder to the Juggernaut tank and the AT-AT. The GAR also came equipped with a standard battle plan for use in planetary invasions. In textbook engagements, the army would be brought to a planet by acclimated class assault ships, which would descend into its upper atmosphere and deploy waves of LAATs. LAAT gunships would deploy the first wave of clone troopers, which would form a battle line and clear away an assembly area, while LAAT/C dropships would drop off vehicles to reinforce them. Speeder bikes or scout walkers would be sent out for reconnaissance or flanking attacks, while the main force pressed forward under Jedi leadership with support from ATTEs and other heavy vehicles. While additional waves of clones and vehicles were deployed via gunship, the assault ships would land and deploy the rest of their forces, including all SPHATs and all other heavy vehicles that were too large for LAAT/Cs to carry. This vanguard would follow behind the early waves, obliterating everything that the first waves hadn't yet dealt with. All the while, ATTEs would act as mobile command posts and rally points for infantry, while LAAT/Is would act as hubs for the Republic BattleNet, monitoring comms from their attached units and swooping in to provide air support or reinforcements. Either could deploy medical droids and recover wounded as needed. On top of the main GAR, the Kaminoans also built up a second, smaller clone army, the Special Operations Brigade. Consisting of elite commandos and ARC troopers, the Special Operations Brigade had its own, completely different rank structure and order of battle. The basic unit in the brigade was the Squad, which consisted of 4 clone commandos, one of whom had the rank of sergeant and commanded the squad. Most of the time, Republic commandos just operated as part of their squads, as larger formations tended to defeat the point of covert commando units, but there were larger units above the squad level for organizational purposes. 5 squads, or 20 commandos, made up a troop, which was commanded by a Jedi commander. 5 troops, or 100 commandos, made up a company commanded by an ARC commander, and 5 companies, or 500 commandos, made up a commando group commanded by a Jedi general. There were 10 commando groups, a total of 5,000 clone commandos, in the Special Operations Brigade, which was commanded by Jedi General Arligan Zay. Originally, there were 10,000 personnel in the Special Operations Brigade, but heavy casualties in the Battle of Geonosis cut that number in half. Then there were the Republic Navy and the Republic Starfighter Corps. While the Grand Army of the Republic was an entirely new unit rather than a continuation of the old Republic Army, the Navy and the Starfighter Corps were revivals of old institutions, and they inherited most of their standards and traditions from their predecessors, particularly the Navy. Nonetheless, they were still staffed, at least partially, by clones, and their modern iterations had their roots in Kaminoan designs. The Starfighter Corps especially was a clone-dominated branch, although recruited fighter pilots began to pop up as the war went on. In practice, this new iteration of the Starfighter Corps operated more or less as a subsidiary of the Navy or the Grand Army. In space, interceptors provided defense for capital ships, while snub fighters carried out attack runs against enemy fleets. In planetary atmospheres, starfighters primarily provided ground support for the Grand Army and intercepted enemy fighters doing the same thing. Nonetheless, the Starfighter Corps as a branch retained its independence for historical reasons. The Corps operated a ton of different starfighter models over the course of the Clone Wars, as it struggled to keep up with the superior starfighter forces of the Confederacy. Notable designs from different points in the war included the V-19 Torrent, the Y-Wing Bomber, the ARC-170, and the V-Wing. The Corps' organization was relatively simple. The smallest unit in the Starfighter Corps was the Section, which consisted of 2 to 4 starfighters under the command of a lieutenant, while 2 sections, or 4 to 8 starfighters, made up a flight commanded by a captain. The most commonly seen unit in the Starfighter Corps, the Squadron, contained 3 to 4 flights, or 12 to 32 starfighters, under the command of either a Major or a Jedi Commander. Above the Squadron was the Wing, which contained 3 to 10 squadrons, or 36 to 320 starfighters, under the command of a Commander or Jedi General. The highest level of organization within the Starfighter Corps, the Group, consisted of 2 wings, 72 to 640 starfighters total, under the command of a Clone Commander or Senior Jedi General. Sections and flights were usually only detached for patrol duties or special missions, and starfighters were usually deployed in squadrons. Wings represented the total carrying capacity of most Republic capital ships, while groups represented the total starfighter capacity of the average Republic Navy battle group. Both were usually split up into squadrons, but they were sometimes deployed in force for large battles. Then there was the Republic Navy itself. The Navy was a bit of an outlier in the Clone Wars era Republic military for 2 key reasons. The first is that the Kaminoans didn't really plan out a full navy. They didn't have the experience, so they just commissioned a lot of assault ships and figured that the Republic would sort out the rest. The other is that most of the personnel within the Republic Navy weren't actually clones. While there were clones in the Navy, both enlisted personnel and officers, the majority of the Navy's ranks were composed of former judicials, conscripts from the PSFs, or recruits. This meant that the New Republic Navy pretty much just defaulted back to the Old Republic Navy's traditions and structures without many changes brought on by the Kaminoans. On the contrary, the Old Guard of the Old Republic Navy seized the reins of the new force pretty much straight away. While the Navy had been gone for a millennium, its legacy officer families and traditions had lived on in the judicial forces and PSFs. The Republic Navy's new officers were mostly drawn from those units, and they made sure to immediately resurrect all the old traditions of the Republic Navy, as well as its former tactics, organizational structure, and general approach to warfare. The only real shift in the Navy was in the classes of capital ships it relied on. The start of the Clone Wars killed the old strategy of primarily relying on large groups of smaller, faster vessels, replacing it with a new age of enormous heavy cruisers and battleships, spurred on by the first ships of a new and soon-to-be infamous class, the Star Destroyers. Initially, the Republic Navy primarily consisted of Acclamator-class assault ships supported by whatever smaller vessels the Republic could muster, from refitted Consular-class cruisers to Carrack-class light cruisers, Architans-class light cruisers, and Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers. But as the war went on, the Acclamator was supplanted as the Republic Navy's capital ship of choice by the first Star Destroyers. The Venator-class Star Destroyer became the Republic Navy's backbone, and it was later joined by the Victory-class Star Destroyer. In the later stages of the war, the Navy began using even larger vessels as command ships, the likes of Praetor and Maelstrom-class battlecruisers and Mandator II-class Star Dreadnoughts. By the final days of the war, the Navy's suppliers were working on new, even more powerful Star Destroyers to complement the Venator, these being the Tector and Imperator class. All of these ships, from the puny Carrack class to the 8-kilometer-long Mandator II class, were each commanded by a captain, or rarely a Jedi commander. Strictly speaking, captains commanded a Republic Navy unit called an element, but this was just technical speak for individual capital ships. These vessels were mixed and matched as part of the Navy's larger organizational units, the smallest of which was the section. Sections of larger ships were called the lines and contained 3 or 4 ships, while sections of smaller vessels were called flotillas and contained 6 to 12 ships. Sections were commanded by the senior-most captain or Jedi commander, and they handled most missions outside of major naval engagements. 3 to 4 sections made up a squadron, consisting of 12 to 36 capital ships plus support units. Usually, squadrons maintained a mix of lines and flotillas, and they were commanded by a commodore or a Jedi general. Squadrons could handle most direct naval engagements, and individual squadrons were usually designed for a specific purpose, such as defensive screening, blockade actions, or pursuit. 2 to 4 squadrons, usually all of different types, made up a battle group, commanded by an admiral or Jedi general. Battle groups contained 48 to 72 warships plus support units, and they were usually the largest naval force deployed to a single battle. 3 to 6 battle groups, or 1 to 300 capital ships plus support units, made up a fleet, commanded by a fleet admiral. These were usually theater-scale units assigned to particular sectors, and Republic Navy fleets only rarely operated as single units, typically for particularly massive battles. There were hundreds of fleets in the Republic Navy, spread all across the galaxy. Some fleets were grouped up into armadas, massive forces of 1 to 5,000 ships that represented all the naval forces assigned to a particular theater of the Clone Wars. Armadas were only semi-formal units, typically assigned to a systems army and commanded by a high Jedi general, and they could vary widely in scale. All told, the structure and overall function of the Republic military didn't really evolve at all during the Clone Wars. The military's tactics got better and some aspects of it adapted to match, but these were mostly situational rather than organizational changes. Apart from the nationalization of the PSFs and the steady shift of Republic industry to a war footing, the Republic military mostly remained constant throughout the Clone Wars, except where leadership was concerned. The Republic Armed Forces as a whole technically answered to Republic High Command, which was led by the Chief of Defense Staff and answered jointly to the Senate and the Jedi High Council. In practice, most upper leadership decisions were made directly by the Jedi Council, since they were all generals anyway, often in informal consultation with the Supreme Chancellor. This was within the spirit of the original structure, since High Command was supposed to answer to both of these anyway. The Jedi Councilor's dual places on the hierarchy just allowed them to cut out the middlemen, except where things like funding were concerned. But toward the end of the Clone Wars, the Senate started to take away some of the Jedi's military authority, which it promptly handed to the Supreme Chancellor. Toward the end of the war, this shift became official, and the Senate officially named Supreme Chancellor Palpatine the Supreme Commander of the Republic military. From that point forward, High Command answered directly to Palpatine, and the Jedi answered to them. This came at roughly the same time as the Sector Governance Decree, an amendment to the Constitution that implemented 2 new positions, that of Planetary Governor and that of Sector Moff. These positions would be both military and political, and they created an entirely separate command structure that was only accountable to the Supreme Chancellor, circumventing the Senate entirely. Planetary governors were military officials assigned to enforce local government's loyalty to the Republic, both through political means and, when needed, military support. The Moffs, meanwhile, were handed command of the sector armies, initially sharing these commands with the senior Jedi generals. They answered solely to the Supreme Commander, i.e. Palpatine, and they had two roles: commanding sector armies alongside the Jedi and overseeing the political administration of oversectors. The Moffs strengthened Palpatine's control over the Republic military, allowing him to bypass the Jedi completely, and they also rendered the Senate completely redundant, stripping it and the local governments of all control over military forces. The Moff system allowed Palpatine to rule the galaxy directly through the military, giving him absolute political and martial authority. This system, as you can probably tell by now, transformed the Republic into the Empire in all but name, and it only took a few days for this change to become official. That was the purpose of the Sector Governance Decree, of course, and of the New Republic military as a whole. All throughout the Clone Wars, the Republic military steadily grew in scale, and more of the Republic was converted to supporting it. As the Republic shifted to a war footing, everything about it was militarized, even as the Republic military began to beat back the Separatists and begin the Outer Rim sieges. By the end, the Republic had transformed into a de facto military dictatorship, and as the war came to an end and the CIS ceased to exist, the transformation only accelerated. With the issuance of Order 66, the Jedi Order was removed from command and all but exterminated, and with them out of the way, the transformation became official. The Galactic Republic became the Galactic Empire. In this new state, the Imperial military would rule the galaxy pretty much directly on the Emperor's behalf, building up the groundwork laid during the Clone Wars to usher in a new age of tyranny. But what do you think? What's your favorite era of Republic military history? Make sure you let us know that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.